All right, might as well go ahead and get started then, since I think we're probably going to be here for a little while tonight. Are you ready with the recording, Brian?
Yeah, I forgot to pause it when I started it, so that was all on the recording, but
okay.
Bob's really good at trimming it and putting that, Triton School Committee splash page on.
Bob can save us and make it look professional.
Many a time he's saved us nicely.
All right. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order the July 27th meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 7 p.m. I'm Nerissa Wallen, Chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you, Paul. Maureen?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thanks, Maureen. Caitlin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Lees, doesn't look like he made it in quite yet.
Nope.
Linda?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
And Tina would be the last one. I don't see her on the list yet either, though. Nope. So they'll be joining us soon. We have a quorum, so that's not an issue as long as when they log in, they're able to hear us. All right, and staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Superintendent Forget?
I can hear you.
Thank you. I'm going to use official titles tonight because I know there are a lot of people who don't necessarily know who you all are. So, Assistant Superintendent Kim Croto.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you, Kim. And School Business Official Kyle Warren.
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. And Special Education Director David McGee.
I am here and I can hear you.
All right. Thank you, Dave. For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All right, and now I'll read aloud the district vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. All right, now that we're through the legal, thank you all for coming tonight. This will be the first of, well, many, many times that we might be together this week, but 2 official school committee meetings. There'll be another one on Wednesday night. I know we're going to be talking a lot about this tonight, but the school committee and the district overall has to have an initial plan submitted to the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education by July 31st. And that has to include plans for 3 different models: a full in-classroom model, a hybrid classroom remote model, and an all remote model. And it also has to include information on which model we're leaning towards. A final plan is due to the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education by August 10th. And that will be the final plan, and that's actually communicated out to parents following that. So we're in the midst of what's been a very long process, I have to say, a very intensive process, and I thank everyone for sticking with it. I feel like we've gone a world since the last time we met, even though it was only last Wednesday. The survey went out, the discussion sessions were scheduled, and those have gone out. we're starting to gather all of that information back. Tonight, we're going to be talking through some of the basics of the initial plan that will go into DESE later this week. And on Wednesday, of course, we'll be confirming that plan. So we'll have an actual like written document that's prepared to go into the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. None of that, of course, it's all part of the planning process. So I don't expect it to be totally binding, but it gives a direction that we're going in. Apologize, my dogs are making noises over here if you're hearing funny noises. So that's where we're at today. I wanted to just note again that the survey is out there. If you have students in the district and you haven't filled out one survey for each of your students, please do that so that we have your input. I know there were 1,300 submissions roughly, Brian? Yeah. So we're getting up there in numbers, but that's still far short of the number of students in the district. So if
I was muted. Yes, it's over 1,300.
Okay. Thank you. I figured that was what you were saying over there. You know, we'd love to get closer, much closer to having all the students in the district representative part of that survey. That survey is, I'll use the term a dipstick. It is obviously anonymous. We don't want to bind families to any answers at this point. We're simply trying to get an idea of kind of where the general trends within the district are so that we can make some educated decisions as those go on. I like to say, you know, I'm one of a team of 9 committee members, and we're representing roughly 2,400 students across the district and about 400 staff members. But overall, we're actually representing over 20,000 voters and residents in the towns of Raleigh, Newbury, and Salisbury. So that's a lot to carry. We cannot, of course, have all the experiences and all the perspectives of all of the families that are in the district and the residents of our district. So things like that survey and the discussion sessions that we'll be having later this week will help us get a better idea of kind of the breadth of the perspective that is just 9 people on a committee we're unable to simply have because of the small number of people, relatively small number of people we have comparatively. I am sad to say that Kaylee Abbott Bishop, who is our student rep, is unable to join us tonight. She is terrific, and I know many people who have watched the meetings in the past have commented on that specifically to me. She will be back on Wednesday. As it would go with teenagers, she has other things to do as well. So while this has been a priority for her, and we appreciate that, she is unable to make tonight. And last of all, I just wanted to note that this is a meeting of the school committee in the public. We will have an opportunity for the public to speak to us, actually address the committee and the administration later as part of the public comment period in just a few minutes. But this is a school committee meeting. So I'm going to ask the public, you're here as viewers, kind of looking in on our meeting. I'd ask you not to ask questions, to try to unmute yourself. We obviously have the ability to remute you if we need to, but it can be distracting, very distracting for the members who are supposed to be having this kind of contained conversation to have a lot of other things going around us. As strange as it would seem, it's actually easier to ignore things when we're in real life, I think, than when we're here virtually. So that's always interesting. But if we could just, you know, kind of contain the public comment to the public comment period, you can always go ahead and provide additional feedback to the school committee by email if you prefer to do that. That can be done through schoolcommittee@tritonschools.org. There is also an email address for questions about the reopening, and that can go to reopening@tritonschools.org. So that said, I am going to open up the public comment period before we get on with the rest of the agenda. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Members of the public, the meeting host muted you as you entered the meeting. If you would like to address the committee, please indicate now that you would like to do so, either by raising your hand on your video call, using the raise hand option on the participant screen, or using the chat option. The meeting host will unmute you so that you can address the committee. Please refer to the public comment policy language on the agenda when making your comments, and remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. When you have finished speaking, the meeting host will mute you again. I'm just going to read part of the public comment policy really quick, just so that you're aware in case you don't have the agenda in front of you. Members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes unless extended at the discretion of the chairperson. So anyone who would like to speak, you can raise your hand in your video right now, use the chat to indicate that you would like to speak, or use the raise hand option, which I'm pretty sure it's the same in all of these interfaces. I get to it by bringing up the participant screen down in the bottom section, and then I have a raise hand option that pops up in the participants little module that opens up on the right hand side. And I'll say we will be limited to 3 minutes, and I'll try to give you a signal as we go through that. So, all right, anyone for public comment? Going as I go. All right, seeing none, we will move on with the agenda. The next item on the agenda is fiscal year 21 September opening and budget implications, and I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent first so that he can give us an update on everything that's happened since the last meeting last Wednesday.
So thank you. I noted earlier, but just to note that the principals are with us tonight. I think they've all shut their videos off because they're all in different places, but we just wanted to have them here and listening. So I appreciate them being at least present to hear the discussion, and certainly I don't anticipate needing them to be involved. But this has been, I think the working group is up to 64 individuals. Kim's chiming in from the Outer Banks. I mean, people are just doing what they have to do to make this happen this summer. So it's I appreciate all the work that everyone's doing, because it's literally whenever we feel like we made even the slightest of decisions, we get some new guidance and things change yet again. So I know this has been very frustrating for parents. As a parent myself, trying to figure out what the fall will look like. So I know everyone on the committee and teachers and everyone is fully cognizant of the challenge that parents are facing as they look to the fall and try and figure out, especially those with young kids, what the fall will look like for their own work schedule and in childcare. But I think unfortunately I would much rather do this slowly and methodically, and at the end up with a result that we all believe is the best choice moving forward, and primarily places the health and safety of all of our students and teachers primarily at the forefront. So this is not, I've heard people say, we're trying to make the best, worst decision we've ever made. There will be no perfect solution here. Our hope is to do the best we can and keep health and safety as the priority. So not a ton I want to update you on, other than the fact that we do have 4 official pieces of guidance that came out since our last meeting. The first is transportation. We talked about that last week. We now have official transportation guidance that was sent along to you. There's nothing shocking in there. Basically what we talked about last week holds true, which is 1 student per seat, alternating window aisle, windows open all the time, masks on all the time, assigned seats. We can place 24 students on a bus. The kind of quick read early information in the survey is about 35% or about a third of bus riders would feel comfortable with those guidelines. We asked the question about every other seat on that survey, and an additional roughly was 12-13% of individuals would feel comfortable having their child on the bus with that arrangement. So that is certainly something I wanted your guidance on this evening, because you took a vote, it seems like a year and a half ago, to use 6 feet as the standard rather than 3 feet as set out in the DESE guidelines. So the transportation guidance uses the same 3-foot standard that they used in the initial guidance back on June 25th. So I'm going under the assumption that you feel you would take the stance that if 6 feet is healthy in the schools, then 6 feet is healthy on the buses. And what that would ultimately mean is rather than a typical bus that can service 50 students, if we're putting 2 to a seat, 24 students with 1 student per seat per the guidelines on our 77 passenger buses, that would mean we can fit 12 students per bus if we were to follow the 6-foot standard. So 77 passenger vehicles that we have assume 3 to a seat. Obviously, it's very rare, if ever, that we ever assume 3 to a seat. You can fit 3 kindergartners, and that's about it. comfortably on those buses. So, so that's certainly something new. That's new information that we got as of last week, but that's certainly I would love some guidance on that this evening. Remote learning came out last night, or was that Friday night, or some point in the last few days? That was Friday night. Again, nothing real, nothing new really there. Some clarity about the potential solutions that we would use to provide the optional remote choice that parents have, ranging from, you know, the first being we have the resources and, you know, staffing and financial resources to be able to implement a mass virtual academy type program in-house with our own staff, our own resources, technologies, and what have you. We certainly don't have those resources. At the other end of the spectrum is using a platform that the Department of Ed is procuring that would cost between roughly $200 and $400 per student, and we would monitor that, and it's a self-paced remote learning option. We don't know what the platform is. It's out for procurement. I believe it was due on Friday. So I'm hoping in this over the course of this week and next week we start to get some information. I did just have a meeting scheduled with the commissioner on Wednesday, which is impressive that we got a 48-hour notice or about a 46-hour notice this week, which is impressive. So hopefully there's some information there that we learn. But again, nothing really other than the discussions that we've had for 2 or 3 hours each Friday or each Wednesday night over the past weeks. Facilities guidance is also came out on Friday night, or that was last week. I'm sorry, that was transportation and facilities was last Wednesday, literally right after our meeting. Again, nothing shocking there. Kyle continues to work on, we're working with, again, a parent volunteer from Rowley who's in the industry, as well as our own contractor, and also working with an engineering firm to plot out the best way to assess the airflow capacities. We know we're gonna increase and improve filtration. We know there are some things we're gonna do off the bat, but we need to do some assessment to see what the airflow is like. That's, you know, the major issue is air quality. Obviously the spacing of the rest of the school, cafeterias and what have you, all of that is laid out in that document. And again, nothing really, again, far more detail, but nothing new as far as my read on that. And then on Friday with the remote learning, a document, I forget what they titled it. It's basically kind of special classes and extracurriculars. So choir and sorry, admitting as we go. Choir, for example, if there's some very specific guidelines that DPH has put into place where obviously if you're singing, that's a time when you are aerosolizing more and projecting more of the virus and droplets out into the air. So for example, choir can happen outside only and with masks with 10-foot distancing. So nothing has been completely ruled out. Choir, band, music theater, there's one other in that category.
Physical education was also in that document.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was complete, that had to be outside. So anything like where you're woodwind instruments, choir, outdoor, you know, music theater literally have to be outdoors. That literally says they are not allowed to happen inside a school building. So, so again, some detail there, no mention of athletics. That's still a work in progress. You know, the MIA delayed a decision on the fall season until September 14th. There's now quite a big discussion across the state about why is DESE silent on that? Why is the MIAA leading the charge on that? I have no issue with MIA having an opinion, but there should be specific guidance from the Department of Ed and the Department of Public Health on athletics as well. So those 4 pieces of guidance we now have in hand, and you have them in your hands. Again, nothing shocking. The only real thing that I think changes is on transportation. From a previous vote on July 15th of using the 6-foot standard, that allows us, that actually requires us to go a little more restrictive and put 1 every other seat, allowing ridership at 12. So the other piece that just changed literally an hour before this meeting, we had heard across the state on Friday about an agreement jointly between the Mass Teachers Association, American Federation of Teachers, and Boston Teachers Union, working jointly, working and meeting with the state and the commissioner that they've agreed a reduction of 10 days in the academic year. So that doesn't change our work year calendar for our teachers or our educators or any staff. They still work 183 days, but the academic year has been reduced to 170. So certainly the spirit is that those are front-loaded days, so that we have days at the beginning of the year when teachers are back. Our teachers are back as of Monday, August 31st. Have teachers back for training. We've talked about having maybe, you know, if we're going to use the week before and after Labor Day, as we've talked in the past, have 1 week that's dedicated to the COVID operational stuff, for lack of a better term, from the training, the mechanics, how does traffic flow work in the school, sanitizing, all those basics that we need to train everyone on as far as how the school is going to function. And then that second week focusing more academically and programmatically on making that model, whatever that model is. Again, now we're talking about the hybrid, launching that model effectively. So the one caveat is that school needs to start by September 16th, which is a Wednesday. So for us, if we used 7 of the 10 days, we would start school on September 16th. If we used 5 of the 10 days up front, we would start school on Monday the 14th. So I guess that's 8 of the days, sorry. So no, 7, yeah, 7 or 5. So we would have, that's a question that will come down to you. Certainly that's going to be a discussion with the TRTA and IAs as far as the calendar, and by contract, we review the calendar with them. You have a set calendar, but you, as a committee, determine the calendar for the school year on my recommendation. So that's certainly something that, now that that is official, and we have noticed that that is indeed fact, I would very much love to wrap that up as soon as possible in regards to a discussion, a committee discussion, and then we meet again with the TRTA on Wednesday before our Wednesday night meeting. And if that would allow us to set the calendar and notify parents of when we intend the academic year starting. If parents are currently assuming that the academic year, obviously it's not going to look normal, would have been on, I believe Wednesday the 2nd was the first day of school. We were going Wednesday and Thursday, Tuesday the 2nd and 3rd. If we're now pushing that off a week and not starting until Monday the 14th, that's a very different scenario, or later. And Nerissa, it looked like you were going to ask a question.
I do. I have a question for you, because I was reading on the desktop and it says that school districts will have 10 additional days at the start of the 2020-2021 school year to prepare for the reopening of schools. I didn't read that as a, you can take them when you want to take them. I read that as a, you need to front load with these 10 days. Do you know?
There's been a lot of discussion about that and unpacking that. The spirit is absolutely front loading, absolutely. But if we were to load all 10 days, we would be starting on Monday, the 21st of September. Because we have 3 personal days, PD days. I mean, we could use those 10 days up front, and our technical, like, it's like tracking those dollars through DESI you can't spend school choice money on, you know. So if we use our PD days in during the year and then front load the 10 days, this is the first I've read it as an hour before the meeting. So I'm hoping we get some clarity on that specifically. My understanding is that the commissioner cannot negotiate with the MTA, AFT, and BTU on behalf of local bargaining units. So they can bargain the number. They can bargain that the number is one that statutorily it went from 180 to 170. But how that plays out, they can certainly speak to. It's supposed to be at the beginning of the year. But I've heard lots of discussions about using some up front and then some. We've talked a lot of discussion going around about the Framingham plan. They're starting fully remote, but they very methodically placed in definitive dates of when they would shift. They're starting remote as of today. They're assuming they're starting remote. The first time they would shift to a potential hybrid, I believe, is November 4th, and they would make that decision by October 19th. And then if they don't hit that deadline, they're still going to stay remote, then they would go to a later date. So I certainly think our plan needs to land there, that we have some very distinct milestones. So we could also use, I've heard people talking about using those days in between a shift to say, look, we're, as of Wednesday, if we make the call, we're gonna use 2 days, that Thursday and Friday, bake those in, and then we start the following Monday in a new model. So yeah, we need to have very clear, there's a lot of difference between what the commissioner uses as the press release and the details of how we have to make that work. But my understanding is they cannot negotiate for local, certainly not for the committee, and they cannot negotiate with local entities. So that's really it as far as new documentation. Everything else, I feel like, it's just been this kind of slow dribs and drabs of getting new intel, and it's all supplementing, sometimes supplanting in certain cases. It's replacing, but it's mostly just continues to supplement the guidance that was issued on June 25th, providing more and more detail. So,
Thank you. Mr. Lees, did you have a question? I noticed you popped your mic off or on.
I just had a comment, Nerissa.
Oh, we just lost your audio.
How about now?
There we go.
You're good.
Perfect.
Sorry. I had spoken to Brian earlier today about this issue of 10 days, and I had told him that I thought it'd be more helpful to break up the time frame, because if we're going to say a virtual, it seems like 10 days is an awful lot of time to get your virtual off the ground, remote learning. And also my other concern was the plan that we're going to discuss, I guess, Brian, this preliminary plan. I just had concerns about whether the virtual or remote learning is going to be done off the state platform, or whether the district is going to have their actual own remote plan.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer for that yet. Yeah, we're waiting to see the state platform. As I said, I believe the RFP was due on Friday. So it has to do with, we need to know when we can ask, I believe Nerissa, you said early on, parents to commit, right? So we're not asking, we've asked parents anonymously if they anticipate choosing a remote option. If we say definitively we're opening on a remote or a hybrid plan, I assume then parents are going to say, okay, now I know, now I'm ready to commit. I'm okay with the hybrid, or I'm going to choose the remote option. So obviously it'd be nice to know what our options are as far as that fifth option in the document that talks about that state platform. That's the most appealing, because if we don't have the staff, if we're in a hybrid model, and I'm a teacher, right? I'm a fourth grade teacher. I have 20 students, so I see 10 students one day, then I see the next 10 students the other day. So my cohort A and B, I'm still working with those students when they're home the following day, but it's in alignment with everything we're doing. If someone's choosing a complete remote option, there's no way for me as a teacher to also monitor a complete separate platform that allows a fully autonomous remote option. So there will be some, I don't want to say local control, there'll be some involvement that we have to have, but we don't know what the plan is yet. So we don't know what the entire platform is yet. So once we know what the platform is, that will allow us to make a decision. And then if the early data on the survey is showing there's a significant portion of parents who would choose to the voluntary remote option, 25%, if there's 25% of families that really pans out, and that isn't just an anonymous survey data point, but that's a real data point, and all of a sudden we have 600 students who are going the remote option, that frees up staff, faculty and staff, that allows us to make them dedicated remote educators, and we then implement the plan that way. But again, it's this continued, there's always a missing data point that allows us to make a decision and say, okay, we're going to go this way. So I'm hopeful that on Wednesday we learn what that platform is that the state is procuring. I think that's been, I don't want to speak for Kim, but I think, that's been my default assumption, is that is the default assumption, that where we would land, simply because it would be the most feasible for us to manage as a remote opportunity for students on a voluntary basis. Obviously, if we go in a hybrid model where students are in school one day and remote the next, that's very different. That's all part of the plan we're putting in place. Likewise, if we went fully remote, that's all part of the plan that we have in place.
Tina has a question.
Yes, my question has to do with if
for families that opt for the remote option, and I think, Brian, you said that we're not sure yet, but that could cost between $200 and $400 per student. I'm assuming, is that cost going to be picked up by the district, and then will that be savings for us within our budget that we can reallocate throughout the district, but those students will still count as enrolled in the school?
So they will, I'll answer that backwards. So yes, they will still count as enrolled. It will be, yes, that will be increased costs, but there will be no savings. So we would still be required to have, and I guess it's all, you know, as a general rule, there would be no savings. There could be if it depends on the total number of students that ended up going voluntarily remote and where they landed. Is it primarily elementary? Is it primarily high school? Is it a perfect blend across the board? That all will impact. If there's 2 students here, 3 students there, there will be, you know, it's something we'll have to put into place. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess I didn't mean savings. Well, at least we'll be saving in resources if we can reallocate the staff to help the kids in the hybrid model at the very least. I'm trying to look at the bright side.
Yes. So if there was enough of a bolus of remote families and it freed up staff, those staff would actually be focused on those students who are remote, because it doesn't become, it's not, you know, people talked about the TECA, which is the Mass Online Virtual Academy, Tech Connections Academy. So we pay, when students go there, we pay a school choice bill. It's just under $9,000. I know school choice is only 5, but TECA gets almost 9. So if we had 100 students go to TECA, we're looking at a new bill for $900,000. So that's different in that a student would unenroll from Triton, enroll with TECA, and TECA becomes, they are a public school in Massachusetts. So this is, we remain the school of record. We remain responsible for their education. We are then just opting into subscribing to a platform that is aligned to the Massachusetts standards and is more self-paced with teacher direction for students and families to work through the curriculum and standards for that grade. But we would have to have an educator assigned to that student. The question remains, could one educator work with 10 students or with 30 students? I think that's the question as we see what the platform is and so forth. So
thank you.
Paul Goldner's up next, and then Aaron.
I feel like at this point we have a whole bunch of different moving parts in terms of associated costs with each model. And if at some point we could see a breakdown of the different costs associated with each model so we could do a direct comparison, I think that would be helpful.
I agree. And as soon as we can do that, I would absolutely provide that to you. And I don't think you should make a choice until we can do that. Again, I'm hoping that by Wednesday, we know what that remote platform looks like.
All right, Aaron, you're up next.
So we've talked in the past about losing the number of kids in a classroom doesn't necessarily equate to having a teacher free up. How would this be different if what percentage of kids would actually have to go full hybrid for us to be able to free up a teacher, as well as would that teacher be able to cover across the different grade levels, or would we require the appropriate grade level teachers to be able to facilitate the use of that online program?
Great question. So I don't think there's a perfect science there. I know Kim unmuted herself. I know she wants to say something, but I think there isn't a perfect science, which means we have to wait and see who elects to go remote. And then, you know, we usually post at the elementary level, we post the classroom assignments usually like August 15th, right? We send out, new class assignments and homerooms and teachers. As we set those up, we'd be setting them up differently in a hybrid model than we would potentially in a remote model. And that's where it would be great by the time we're doing that we have the answers, and we'd be able to say to parents, can we ask you to commit, right? Can I ask you to commit? We are going hybrid. Can I ask you to commit? Here is the plan, right? What we're intending to do for a voluntary remote option. Can I ask you to commit? And then that allows us in pretty short order to turn around and say, okay, we know the numbers of students who will not be in, so we can then reallocate the staffing resources we have. So Kim, I know if you want to jump in.
No, I was just going to say, I think Paul said it, there's so many moving parts because we need more information to make this decision. I have no idea what types of instructional platforms that this remote learning opportunity will be like for parents. So some of the instructional platforms could be very easy to navigate. Some could be more complicated. So again, without knowing what that curriculum and the resources that are going to potentially be using, it's hard to make the assumptions as far as how much staff is going to be used to help support those, and then to what degree. So I think it was Tina who said last week, if we're doing remote, I think it's really important that these kids still have some type of social connections with their friends and with their teachers. But in a full remote, what are our options? So again, there's just, until we get all the information, I certainly don't feel comfortable making a decision, because this one's a really important one. I mean, not that any of them are not important, but this one is especially, because what if you have somebody who signs up for remote who wants to go to hybrid? And now we're going to be talking about, yes, they're all aligned with the standards, but are they totally two different platforms now that the family has to adjust to? I was doing this platform for all of my subjects. Now I'm switching over to this one because this is what the school is using. So again, as we start to really figure this out, there's just more question. In order for us to make some type of decision that we feel confident about, I certainly want all the information in front of me.
So Kim, is it premature to know whether or not we would need different grade level teachers, or is that something that's not available to us yet?
Definitely not available to us yet, because as Brian said, we don't know who's coming back. We don't know for teachers or kids. Again,
well, I meant in the program itself, like if they gave you any more details on what the program requires. No?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm keeping an eye. That's my big thing right now. Keeping my eye on that one.
Well, and at one point they actually talked about a fully autonomous, like a tech academy, that we would be able to send students to at the state level, and paying the tuition, but not a $9,000, choice bill. So that was the initial presentation, was something like that parents could truly engage with and make the choice and go there. And it's literally autonomous, with instructors, with platforms that have the instructors included as a service with the platform. But that isn't what was put out as an RFP. And certainly if it's $200 to $400 per student, it doesn't come with the educators and teachers and all that, like a fuel education or any of these other models where you can take full courses through the systems.
Other questions from the committee while we're on that? And I think, I have a couple of other, like the big items within the plan that we have to submit that I want to go back through with the committee, but I want to talk out the remote concerns first, if we can. Caitlin?
I know we don't know anything about the remote option yet coming from the state, but if it's self-paced and that family chooses to go back to hybrid, wouldn't they be in potentially very different spots than their peers? And how do we even begin to handle that situation when it comes up?
That's, I mean, again, that's a really important point. Even with, obviously we're not going to do any type of assessment until we get the kids in a really, in a good place as far as social and emotional, but Are they going to be part of our benchmarking system? Are we going to know when kids are not making adequate progress? How do we intervene? So there's so many questions that we have. I just want to make sure we have a safety net for these families and the kids, and that we don't just send them off in a remote kind of educational world and then they come back to us a year later and we're hoping for the best. Like I don't feel comfortable with that. I feel like I want to make sure that we have checkpoints or supports, or again, maybe we do some type of remote that we have some look at the options that they have for the remote rooms. I heard that they were potentially looking into iReady. Well, we use iReady in that elementary, and is there some flexibility where we can do self-paced learning at the upper grades, at the high school level? So again, I have a list of questions that continuously grows. But I can tell you this, I'm certainly not going to make any recommendation to even the working group without unpacking all of this.
I'm actually looking in the remote guides, it was listed that we can actually set. That's actually what I was looking for when you were asking the question, Caitlin, is that we can set a 2 to 3 week window to say, okay, you notify us on whatever, September 15th. And then we're going to say, okay, then as of October 1st, we're ready to have you back. And maybe we have some work, maybe there's some interaction to say, what have you been doing? Obviously we will have an educator who will have been involved with them. So it's not like there's a complete disconnect, but we can then work with that student over the 2 to 3 weeks to bridge that gap as best we can. We won't be able to completely mitigate it, but we'll be able to bridge that gap and get them as much on pace as possible. So I mean, it definitely will be, and I think that's how we phrase it. If parents shouldn't choose the remote option haphazardly, right? So it's not, it's an option, and if parents feel that they need to. But if it's the remote option, full remote option, when we're in a hybrid, there will absolutely be some level of disconnect that we will do our best, but that it will be a challenge to mitigate. So.
All right, Linda. Linda, I can see you speaking, but we cannot hear you.
Probably
There you
because
go.
I did not unmute myself.
I would never do that.
I know that when the kids come back, there's going to be some type of an assessment to find out where the gaps are. If they're on remote learning, is there any type of assessment that's going to happen prior?
I would imagine that whatever platform that they are going to be using, because that is a strong push and a recommendation and an expectation at the state level for just the public schools, that they would probably, I would assume, have that wrapped into their remote learning as well. They'd have to do some type of placement to find out where they would start their self-paced learning for all subject areas.
I don't know. Yeah, there you go.
Is she unfrozen? Did she hear me?
She is unfrozen. Did you have anything else, Linda, or was that it? Oh, she's frozen again.
Frozen with a smile this time.
Yeah.
That's not, as far as a Zoom freeze, that's a pretty good, that's a pretty good Zoom freeze.
Yeah.
I have no more questions on it.
Thanks, Linda. Paul Mayette.
I'm just curious, given the number of questions that we're all putting out there and that you've got written down already, excuse me, could you envision a scenario in which we say this state remote plan is just too much trouble and we create something for ourselves, or is
I was talking to Kim about this. We would 100% unequivocally like to produce our own plan. We are confident that we could do it better and keep the students more aligned, to your point, Caitlin, and tracked to make sure that they are engaged with us, and that inevitably, again, it's not going to be a good setup to go back and forth. I'm hybrid, I'm fully remote. It's not going to be, again, the optional. I always want to make sure when we say the hybrid and we're going in school and remote, that's different than a full remote optional. But absolutely, we would unequivocally rather develop our own plan. We just need to know that we have the staff to be able to do that. If we said right now, we have the staff to put make up a number, 15, we had one per grade level at least, K through 12, and we needed 13 new staff, and we were hiring 13 new staff, I would say, yes, we could develop that very quickly because it's been discussed around and around. 13 staff would be about $1.1 million. So I'm pretty sure we're not doing that, right? So if that's the issue, is if we would unequivocally want that, it comes down to a matter of staffing. If enough people, you know, and I know Kim's ready to pivot and turn, and if enough people go remote, and we have people who want to be fully remote, we'd be ready to pivot and turn in very short order, excuse me.
Yeah, and can I just add, like, so over the last few years, we've been building this portfolio of online instructional tools. We've just committed to probably 3 new resources that have these really high quality remote type of tools and resources that folks can use and platforms. So, you know, when you look at those options, it gives you the pros and cons, which I have to give them credit. It was a great document. It's very helpful in looking at the pros and the cons. But we have a lot of those resources that we're looking for. Like Brian said, the missing piece, or what we're looking for, is the resources, the teachers, and what does that look like? I would never just want to put anybody in that particular position. I would want to make sure that they're comfortable, they've been trained in all those particular platforms, they know how to engage students in that virtual world. So yes, it's about a body, but it's also about the right person who's able to work through that and trouble with families and support them through that remote piece.
And we actually have flexibility on any given at any given time. An educator can work up to 20% outside their licensure. So if I'm an elementary teacher, I could teach one class in a middle school setting, as long as it's no more than 20% of my core job. That has been waived, and it's actually 50% for next year. So that allows us some flexibility to say, we know someone will be phenomenal in this role, but they may not be licensed in this role. But this is really about engaging kids, not about the content, because we have this platform. So we're gonna have far more flexibility with that this year, and that's been confirmed.
It's totally different.
Oh, you're freezing. Can you put up your seagull, Kim?
Did I freeze? No, not yet.
Well, you did for us.
Oh,
I almost took a live picture of a seagull on the beach for tonight.
Just in case.
To make it special.
Other questions from the committee on the hybrid, or on the remote model, the full remote option, I should say. All right, seeing none, not a surprise probably, but I have a bunch. Go ahead, Brian.
Can I just say again, so we were talking about the optional full remote. Okay, just to make sure. So we're not talking about if we decided to go fully remote, there would be no one needing to choose that, and we would have a very solid plan in place for that. Okay, just to make sure that's clear.
So here's my first question, is I read through I forget what the actual title of it is, but it's the if you have symptomatic positive cases in your district, all that stuff. So it talks about if a student has any symptoms, potential symptoms of COVID, right, that they need to go get tested or wait out a certain duration, close contacts, that they, can't come to school. How in a hybrid model, or even in a full in-person model, how would you handle those cases? Are you thinking they would bump into the state full remote model for a short amount of time if that was the option that we went for that remote option? Or are you thinking that there's some way to service them in district while they're home for those, call it 10 to 14 days?
The latter, because they would be returning to the classroom, and we know and are expecting them to return. So we'd be able to keep them paced better than if it was all day, right? So if they're having to go 10 days in quarantine, or they test and positive, test and are negative and are back in 3 days, we would work with, and it wouldn't necessarily, again, we got to figure out the staffing, but the plan would be to absolutely use our staffing to work a one-on-one, an individualized remote option. Yes.
So just to make sure our expectations of the scenarios for this are aligned, how many students do you think are going to be out in that type of scenario at any given point?
Yeah, potentially a lot, which creates
Okay.
a significant challenge.
Yes. All right. Because that's my question too. I don't think it's 3 students or 5 students. I don't even think it's 25 students on a given day. I'm going to guess it's significantly more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere up in the dozens, possibly higher. So, okay. And I just wanted to express that I have some very, very significant concerns about a full remote model for a variety of reasons. One of them is definitely the social emotional and the connection to both other students and other staff in the district. I don't see, I mean, Desi's description is far from complete, right? But I feel like that is totally missing there. And that's one of the things mental health wise that we have heard students say, that we have heard staff say is crucial. And I don't know, how that's happening there or where that's happening there. And that for me would be a big concern. Another one would be, again, that transition that we already talked about, if you're coming from all remote to hybrid and then back to potentially back to all remote. My other question, I guess, which is a big one, is what happens if the district is in hybrid and goes to full remote and we have students who are already on the optional remote? Is it literally 2 different full remote tracks that are running, one with the district and one with the state, if that was this, if the state system was the one that
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. That's a great question, because I think ultimately it would depend on, I would assume if we shift to remote, it's with the intention of coming back, right? Or if we remote and it's with the intention of shifting to hybrid, right? Whatever it is, it's the assumption that we're going to improve in what we can offer. But yeah, if it was for a significant period of time, I would say if it's going to shift back towards hybrid, then it's actually better to keep them 2 separate functions, because even when we shift back to hybrid and call it 80% of students shift back into the cycle, those 20% of students would then continue at the same self-paced but managed by our staff curriculum. That's a good question. I know
there's so many options, right?
Yeah.
Here's my last question, and this may be a Kim question. In our surrounding districts, is there any conversation about going in on a remote optional model together? Because I'm hearing that Central West, kind of that area just west of Worcester, is having some discussions about that, about having like 3 or 4 districts band together, because they know that it's going to be spotty, right? You may have 20 kids in 1st grade in one district and only 5 kids in 3rd grade, whereas another district might have the opposite. So where it's spotty like that, apparently, and I don't have details on this because it's something I literally just heard about today, they're talking about, like, can you have an inter-district essentially remote option?
Right, we're kind of using other resources. Again, I think it would have to look, we'd have to look at what they're offering, or what they have as far as what they have for instructional platforms and what we have for instructional platforms. What we might gain in resources as far as people, if we need to, we might lose some traction because now we have to learn everything new, and then when they come back to us in hybrid or full bread or whatever that might be, we might have to shift over into our curriculum that we're using. So again, we'd have to outweigh the options, because like I said, what we gain in kind of pulling everybody together, we might lose some education to another educational level.
I think I caught that. So
you froze up a little there, Kim.
Yeah, you broke up a little. But I think the simple answer to my question is probably no, there's no discussions locally going on about that.
We haven't at this point, but that's not to say there are things that are not, I mean, we're not there yet, but I just, again, I would have some more questions and just want to make sure that in the end, we're not at a disadvantage, right? It's about easing the anxiety of folks. It's about working together to kind of share this enormous responsibility. But we don't want to do it at the cost, because we already know our students have had and families a difficult time through all this. So the decisions, as tough that they are, we don't want to have to be paying for them 2 to 3 years later saying, oh, I wish we had done this, if we had only done this. I want to feel good about, like Brian said, the bad decisions that we have to make, you know?
Yeah, no,
So-
and I 100% agree.
Yeah.
Can I ask, so in regards to when you say group effort, is it pooling district staff to teach a kind of a collectively monitor the remote platform, or is it going in to Fuel Education or some other online platform and collectively buying into a platform?
No, so the way it was described to me is basically the exact same way I just described it to you, which is that idea that if you have, multiple first grade classrooms and one school could potentially have 30 kids out, right? Then they technically probably have an extra teacher free. Another district might only have 5 kids out in first grade. So if you bond together in some sort of a joint remote option, you can have a first grade teacher from the one that's free, right? That could be taken on those 30 students and 5 students from another school, and however that works out between schools. And then presumably in other grades, then another school might have a significant number of students out where they could free a staff member from a classroom.
That's interesting, but that would have to be codified somehow, because Pentucket and Newburyport couldn't educate Triton students without them being registered, and basically they would become choice student.
Right. But I will say there might be some legs, again,
I like the idea.
If we used teachers from other schools, like elementary schools in our own district, like we could certainly do that. That would make more sense to say, oh, if you have an extra teacher over at Pine Grove, could we use you in the second grade over here? That type of sharing of resources has actually more potential, just because, again, same district, same curriculum, same instructional platforms.
Yeah, I'm guessing a lot of those districts out there are smaller. What might work for us intra-district is probably a situation where they would have to go inter-district.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. It was just a question because it came up today, and I thought it was an interesting idea.
Yeah, it's a great concept, but that would have to be somehow codified by DESE to be legal.
Yeah.
But it could be good. I mean, that could actually work well.
Yeah. So I guess just to go back, even if we have 10% of our students, I have significant concerns about going to a state system that we don't fully believe in and have a method to get students actively into and out of. And if it's more like 20 and 25%, which was the initial survey results that Brian had shared, I have huge concerns about that. I mean, that's not a number that you can catch up, right?
Yeah, that's a significant portion of our students that would be, I mean, we would have educators involved, but it would be using a very different platform with likely very different outcomes. Absolutely. Yeah, again, as I said earlier, we would unequivocally, and I know Kim has said this time and time again, unequivocally, we would rather be able to figure out with our own staff how to implement our own system. Even if assuming it would also be just as good, it would absolutely, the hugest benefit would be the ability to pivot in and out so much more cleanly. Yeah.
Paul Goldner?
Just sort of tacking back to what you were saying about the number of kids being out. On a given day, the attendance is probably 4 or 5% absent anyway, right? So if we're maybe doubling that because we have kids who are staying home because they have some symptoms, but maybe would otherwise come to school, so maybe we're up to 8 or 10%, or are we talking like between 30 and 40% of our students between taking the remote option, plus students who are home sick, plus students who are home with symptoms of potential COVID.
I mean, I guess I would say potentially, yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, anything else on the full remote option before we move on? Go ahead, Caitlin.
So if we're talking about, just to think further to what Paul Goldner just said, if you're talking about that level of absenteeism, we come to fan model when you have children that would otherwise be there that are suddenly out for 14 days and then potentially longer, depending on their family situation as far as what, you know, I've known families that have tested COVID positive for one family member, they quarantined for 14 days, and then day 16, they have another positive test and they're out even longer. And then you add that into the school setting. So at what point, at what percentage of absenteeism are we, you know, in kind of like a red zone?
Yeah. Yeah. And the guidance, the document, he was calling it the start-stop document forever. It's called the Protocols for Responding to COVID-19 Scenarios in School, on the Bus, or in Community Settings. That speaks to the cases and how we respond. And then it speaks to if you have a large number in the school and then district-wide, working with the our local health agent, who at this point is still planning on coming on Wednesday, to work and make a community decision. Absolutely. If those numbers, and I suppose we with Deb Rogers and Frank and Jack, the three town health agents, would set those thresholds, I would assume. I mean, I think there's certainly a point where they would say, as the health agent, they they retain the authority for contact tracing and diagnosing and quarantining. That's not a school thing. So they would retain some authority to be able to say, okay, we're good, we're tapping out. But I think also we could work with them to set a threshold. Yeah.
Any other questions on the remote option? Tina?
It's not so much a question or a comment before we move on. You know, I know a lot of people have said in retrospect that, you know, going remote, you know, we were uncharted territories back in the spring, and it, you know, it wasn't ideal and it didn't work out. But I think the thing that did work is that the schools remotely bonded together as a community. And that's what my concern is, because for me, initially what I was thinking, and again, there's so many unknowns on what the state remote plan is. For me as a parent, I'm thinking, or at least I thought, I don't know, none of us really know. That's what we're getting, unfortunately, from the state. And once we know more, I think explaining this to parents and the public, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I can keep my kids home and I can opt into a remote model because it's something that my family can do. We think it's the right thing to do, as much as we want to go back to school, but it's easier for me to control my work schedule if I just keep them home and don't do a hybrid model, so I can plan based on that. However, to your point, Kim, especially with planning, I would love to see, as much as it would be great to do a hybrid model, and you guys are putting all these wonderful efforts into developing a hybrid model that's going to work and be safe for everybody, that we just developed our own, like the best virtual model that we could, so then those families that want to be remote but still be a part of the school can be a part of the school. So to the points that, you know, the challenges that Nerissa brought up that we've talked about, where if the hybrid goes remote and then you have the remote families, they're on two separate tracks, even though they're enrolled, and it's two, you know, and it stinks. So I know the state wants us to come up with these plans, and a lot of people want to go back, but I'm definitely in favor of shifting and making like the best remote option, or at least delaying it and starting remote with everybody and then maybe going to a hybrid. But I just felt that I needed to say that before we moved on.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on full remote before the remote option, I should say, before we go on?
So can I say one more time? So we're talking
Go ahead, Brian.
about the option that parents can have to
Mhm.
go fully remote regardless of what we do.
Yeah, not the remote model, right?
Okay.
But the
That's good.
remote option.
Yep. It's kind of like the word platform. It's been used for to mean 17 different things when we talk about a learning platform. So, okay, just making sure we're speaking the
Absolutely.
same thing.
So I'll come back in the end to where Tina just came from, but I want to move on. The next thing that we need to address in the document to DESE in the initial plan is the learning feasibility study, which was the idea of can you actually have students in your district, in your buildings rather, when you're following all the restrictions and kind of and meeting their needs. So I know we've talked a lot about this as time has gone on, that you know, we look at a 6-foot social distancing rather than 3 foot. We've talked about how that would mean things like desks for Pine Grove and things like that. But I want to come back to this idea of the feasibility study and what it entails and see if there's any questions from the committee on that. Is that a Mr. Lees? No? Maureen? Trying to see who's raising hands. It's really hard.
I see no,
You're
I
all
see no
like,
hands.
Maybe me. No? Paul, did you have a question?
I'm happy to chime in if nobody else wants to, but I had concerns about what was actually done in terms of, you know, boots on the ground and not being part of the working group, and having a real idea of what it was that Chris Walsh and the others did to go through and separate desks and all that. I was concerned about what was actually done.
Brian, can you talk to that a little bit? I know
Absolutely.
a lot of it was modeling. There was a computer program that actually modeled everything out, but.
That was a small piece of it. Yeah. So actually, I mean, and again, the document that you have as far as the what's going to be cut and paste in a form submission with to DESE by Friday is not the final plan. We are supposed to give them an update. So this has been interpreted differently by different districts. So it was the commissioner first called it pressure testing. We need to pressure test the schools to see what we can fit. Pushed on the 3 feet as the priority. Then the term feasibility study came out. So the only 2 submissions that DESE asked for was this, which it was supposed to just be 1, which is sometime in August, which has turned into August 10th. And then since then, this kind of interim report, which is due on Friday. So we interpreted this as we have obviously a whole district-wide working group that is now up to, is it 60, 64 people if you collect everyone. It's educators, it's facilities folks, it's food services, it's nurses, it's parents, it's high school students. So all the potential disciplines. The larger groups tend to focus, you know, when the larger group meets, the focus tends to be on the academic piece. And then there's groups that, you know, Kyle, Chris Walsh, and I be meeting tomorrow morning. Actually, I'll be on the drop-in session, but they'll all be meeting and talking about facilities. So the work that was done by school. So principals worked with head custodians, with some teachers, some educators were involved. Obviously through Kyle, myself, Chris Walsh. And literally there was a tool, I think I shared with you, a tool that DESE produced with an architectural engineer that basically allowed you to plug in some dimensions and take a look at how many desks you would be able to fit in that space. So with that model, when I ran those numbers, and Kyle and I did a workshop on that model, at 3 feet in classrooms, pretty much we can make it work. If we strip every single thing out of classrooms except for desks, that model basically had a 6-foot path at the head of the classroom for the teacher and the teacher desk. And then everything else was desks spaced. The bodies, right? It assumed you plugged in what you assumed for a personal space, which tends to be 2 to 3 feet. And then you had to have 3 feet from my personal space to the next person's personal space. We can do it at 3 feet. We could not do it at 6 feet just in classrooms. So that was then tested out Classrooms were set up, principals, head custodians literally cleared classrooms, set up desks. We didn't take pictures since then. I know there are some districts that have showed pictures, and we could go back and take pictures if that's what you would like to see. None of that was a discussion. It was all go in, test, see what you can do. We did the testing. We did the literally setting up. We did the kind of the technical online model as well as the actual setting up of classrooms. And what we did in person proved out what actually the model that Kyle and I played with really said, which was at 3 feet, we can do it with nothing but desks in the room. And then the concern becomes how we move people around the room or how we move people around the school. For eating, obviously you have to take a mask off and then you have to be 6 feet. So it became challenging with all students so all 2,400 students in the school every day. We struggled with finding ways to move students around. And I will say, that kind of came to a halt as far as testing that on July 15th, when you all took a vote and said, we don't feel comfortable with 3 feet, we feel comfortable with 6 feet. So we moved to 6 feet. At 6 feet, we have the same, and it's actually the second or the first page, which is the first question that Desi asks is, what did you learn from the feasibility test? So at 3 feet, we can do it. We just basically have Pine Grove School is all tables. We need desks, about 500 desks. Storage units, and a lot of them to basically empty the school of everything else. That's not true. There is some space. Some schools have more storage space than others, but significant number of storage units. Additional non-instructional staff, because it wasn't as much about the teaching. It was when we need to figure out that 4th grade class is going to have lunch and we've got one teacher. How do we move those students effectively? Because we got to get them somewhere where they can be 6 feet apart. Are they staggered? So it became not an instructional staff need, but a student management, if you will. Need to relocate students to other areas of the building. That was the concern. And then the busing, obviously at 3 feet, we can do it. If everyone rode the bus, we would obviously need to run double bus runs. I think based on what we're seeing in the survey, if those pan out as true, we probably could handle. No, that's not true. It'd be close. We could potentially bring every student back and figure that out. So at 3 feet, it could be done. The decision on July 15th was we didn't believe that was safe. And so we moved to 6 feet. And then I wrote some narrative there. And then, on top of what those additional costs, at 6 feet, what we basically need to do to bring everyone back is we need to expand beyond the classrooms and use all the extra spaces. And that tool that Kyle and I used actually allowed you to capture the library, the cafeteria, the gymnasium, one other space, auditoriums if they had it. Auditorium's not great, obviously, but we would basically then need to hire additional staff, because if we had 3 sections of 4th grade, we would need at least 5 sections to be able to meet the 6 foot distancing in the classroom. So we need to expand into those extra spaces, set up 2 4th grade classrooms. So it was considerable staffing, equipment to set up desks and spaces, and partitions, and not go back to the 80s with the open classroom concept, but to actually turn those spaces into instructional settings. Regardless, they would not be conducive instructional settings. So then, I'm trying to think.
Brian, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm not gearing these feasibility questions so much towards the elementary or middle school, but towards the high school. Yep. Going forward, if we have a hybrid plan, are you going to look at a class by class, literally what class is being taught, to determine whether there's an A and B requirement? Because one of the concerns I have, I've been looking at class size for a long time, a lot in the high school, again, not in the lower grades of middle school, because those are set and that's pretty much the way it is. But at the high school, if you've got a class of 12 or 14, you're not going to break that into an A and B, are you?
It would depend. Definitively, no. Right? It depend on the flexibility, because it doesn't depend on just that class. So it's not just that student. So Joe might be one of 12 kids in AP Physics, but he might be one of 23, making this up, in English, right? So he's going to end up in a cohort because of based on all the classes. So unequivocally, the way that Patrick and Al have to cohort their students is far more challenging than at the elementary level, where we're just literally splitting the class in half. So if we've got 21 students in a class, one cohort is 10, one cohort is 11, AB, done. And then we would, again, absolutely, we will align them with families. So all students in any family will be part of the same cohort. So parents have all of their kids, regardless of the grade level in which school they're in school or at home on the same day. But no, it could be potentially that the way that cohort worked out, that it would be, I forget the number you used, was it 13? That it would be 10 and 3, right? So that's the kind of the puzzle. I don't know, I'm thinking like the waterfall effect of cohorting at the high school. So we could absolutely, right? I mean, I think the follow-up question that you thought but didn't ask is absolutely we could reduce sections, and it will take out, and it again tends to be the visual and performing arts and AP classes that tend to be the smallest. So it would take away opportunities. So I don't think in this case, the net effect would be no different. That if whether they're in person or remote, to address those smaller class sizes removes opportunities for students.
Can I ask follow-up questions to Paul's? In the document about the, I forget what it was titled again. They're all such catchy titles. The one about classes that need extra safety precautions.
Yep.
One of the things that they mentioned was that a lot of the performing arts, they would even recommend that they be held online because of the difficulty with having students 10 feet apart outside for every class of choir.
Yep.
Is it a possibility to move those to a more remote situation and not have them happen on an in-person day? Is that a possibility in the schedule?
So Patrick turned his camera on, so he's ready.
Oh.
I said I wasn't going to drag anybody in, but he turned his camera on willingly, so he's ready.
Volunteering.
That's right.
So it depends on which class, the classes that are meeting on I don't want to say part-time basis, but they're 0.5 credit as opposed to 1.0 credit. They don't typically meet every day during our school year. There's greater possibility for that with. We've been looking specifically a little bit at our physical education classes because currently we have 2 teachers that teach our entire school. So having 2 teachers come in contact with, each over 300 students during the course of a week is something that I have as a concern. And so we're looking at how we can do that. But yeah, we're still kind of examining some of these issues, especially with the part-time classes or 0.5 classes. The classes that are 1.0 classes, which most of our VPA classes will be next year. There's less it's more challenging to be able to do that because of how we're looking at scheduling the building.
Okay.
And again, the Patrick ended with because of how they're scheduling the building, and they're looking, the discussion is to move towards a block schedule for the purpose of not because we want to ultimately have a block schedule, but because it minimizes the number of students, or I should say minimizes the number of teachers and a student interacts with and vice versa. So there's nothing ideal about what we're trying to do here. This is not, there's no models that we're going to say, hey, that really worked well remote and we're going to stick with it. This is putting something into place that works. So all of this is very easy to talk about when we talk about elementary, right? It's very clean, contained classes. When we start to talk about our highest need students being in every day, right? We talk about that changes things drastically, and specifically with cohorting. So, I mean, all of those other kind of caveats that we say, here's the base assumption, and oh, by the way, parents have an option of remote. We've got to bring all these high need students in every day. And, you know, you keep filling out those little others, it tends to get complicated. So, yeah. So there will definitely be some classes, I fully expect there'll be some classes that would meet fully remote and completely online next year.
Yeah, and to Paul's point, we do have some classes that are smaller in size, some of our integrated classes that are have higher levels of specialized special education population students, or students who require those services. So some of those classes we'd like, or they also have a higher number of English language learner students in them. And some of those classes will see a larger percentage of their students meeting every day because because the population of students that are present in the class will be in school every day.
Paul, do you have follow-on questions to that? You're good? Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Patrick. Any other questions on on the feasibility study before we move on?
I was gonna say, I don't know if did I complete the thought? So that was, I mean, so just if you, so the request from DESE was that the feasibility pressure test that we do is reported out in the final plan. That was how it was initially designed. They then asked us to give them this interim plan, which is due Friday, and then the final plan, which is August 10th. So there, like I said, there are districts who did far more, like I said, pictures and very interesting things in their feasibility study, but we did all that work. I guess if there's information that you would want to see, you know, let me know what it is, and we can certainly go recreate some pictures. But there will be, you know, as far as the detail in the final report, it will detail all those what we did.
Any other comments on the feasibility study? I just want to make one that I think we're in a catch-22 as far as this goes, because a lot of my questions were, well, how many students would it take to be out, you know, on a remote learning to have more students in the classroom? Or how many students would it have to take to not be, you know, taking a bus, to not have to run a double bus run? Or, you know, how would that all shake out as I was thinking through the feasibility study? And until you can tell families exactly what to expect, you can't expect them to answer that question with certainty.
Right.
And without knowing where families are headed, you can't really plan with certainty what their options are going to be. And I don't know, I feel like that's just an overarching thing that we're going to need to grapple with as we go down the road. But that's a question that I keep coming back to is how do you find a middle ground with enough certainty that you can have a family make a fairly definitive decision, that you can then base your district planning on to a greater degree. So, I don't know. All right. Seeing no further questions on feasibility study, I want to skip question 2 for right now, and move on to the 3 models. And Brian had provided the draft. This came out just, I don't know, what was it, last night? I think. So I just want to go over those 3 models one at a time and see if anybody has any questions on those. I feel like these are things we've been talking about, so there may be details in here that you haven't seen before, but the vast majority of this is something that, you know, I think we've all seen. So are there any questions on the full in-person model?
I was going to say, it's, so again, DESE requires that we model that.
Yep.
So just to be clear.
Yes. All right, moving on to the hybrid model. Are there questions on the hybrid model? Linda? Lost her on my screen. Oh, there you are. Can you unmute? Oh, you're trying. Okay.
I can't unmute you either. You're power muted again. It's only Linda that, there it is. Talk, you're good.
No.
Yep. Oh,
I was gonna say I still see her muted, so
how about I?
there we go.
There it goes.
There it is. I think it's Brian. I have a question on the high needs. Does that include the kids who are on IEPs? And how is that going to work being in a hybrid model for their services and things?
So when you say high needs, so as a category, yes. Do you mean the kids who will come every day?
Well, if you have children who are on IEPs for whatever services they may have, that they may need speech or...
We lost your, you're still unmuted, but we lost your audio, Linda.
I think I got the question. So I will say this, and I'll ask Dave to chime in. We're not, so we always talk about high needs populations, right? So that subgroup, EL, special education, 504. So we have those categories, economically disadvantaged. We have those categories of high needs. The guidance is saying we should be bringing our highest, a new qualifier, our highest need students into school on a daily basis. And so, you know, there's guidance that it's not just because, I'm making this number up, 400 and some odd IEPs, not every student on IEP would need to be in school every day. But certainly those that have the highest, most intensive needs, all those in the ASD program at Newbury, for example, we would assume would be in every day. So I don't know if you want to expand on that, Dave.
Yeah, so we're starting with those populations. So we obviously have a number of specialized programs. So that's sort of the first tier of kids that we're looking at coming in every day. And then also, when Sandy and I met today, we're pulling a list of, because when you read an IEP based on the student's placement, it automatically gives you a category for that student, which student is considered high needs, which is moderate, and which is not as significant. So again, it is going to be a difficult line to sort of draw, because they're not telling us that here's the line and all the kids that are below the line should go and the kids that are over it. So, and then there's going to have to be some individual decisions based on a family's, a principal's knowledge of the student. There may be factors that we don't capture on paper. So, but that does, one of the challenges, which I think I talked about last week, is going to be the cohorting. So if you have, I was talking to Beth today, so if you have a student in the ASD program who is almost fully included 5 days a week on the IEP, that student is likely going to be with 2 different cohorts of students in order to fully implement the IEP. So if you look through the document that DESE produced, so in one sense, they tell us, try to keep the cohorts at a minimum, but they use the term when feasible. But they also are telling us that we have to fully implement these IEPs as written with some flexibility. So I think that's the challenge we're still trying to work through. But, and again, we could have students that are, our recommendation is going to be that your child come 5 days a week, but it's also some of the most vulnerable population in the district. So a parent may say, I'm not comfortable with my student coming every day, or I want a fully remote program. And then, so it's really going to have to be, on an individual basis for a lot of families, based on, again, once we can tell them what the options are, once they decide what they are willing to, or they're able to do. But I think we also need to go on record of what our recommendation is based on the facts that we have. So in other words, we're not rewriting COVID IEPs. We're writing IEPs based on as if we were back fully, with everybody in every day. And then if we have to change it, we'll have to come up with an agreement with the parent that says, here's what we're going to do in the meantime. So I don't know if that answers your question fully, but there's still a lot to unpack, because it's impossible, because also too, we have some IEPs where the therapists go into the classrooms. So all the therapists are going to have to be in full PPE. Some kids go to the therapy room and there might be 2 or 3 kids in there. Beth and I looked at the programs today in Newbury. There is plenty of space in some of the contained programs because a lot of the kids have individual workspaces anyways. So that has to be looked at to space out. But again, we're starting with the very highest needs, and then we're sort of working our way down to see where we land. But again, that's going to be a difficult. It's going to be a difficult line because there's not a clear distinction of here's where high needs ends. So.
No, thank you on that.
Yeah.
I have another question about not on this high needs students, but on if a class or a teacher has to be brought out because of the coronavirus, does that teacher still remote into school and the kids, or is the teacher just out for the next 14 days and you need to get a substitute?
It's a good question. We need to confirm that. If a full, you know, we worked the details. If a teacher goes out, if a student goes out, if the class goes out in its entirety, which is, I wouldn't even say possible, but at the elementary level, they've defined that close contact at the elementary level. If someone is diagnosed, everyone in that classroom is close contact. So everyone would have to quarantine. So I will confirm that.
I wonder if there's going to be, because I'm thinking with the new law in Massachusetts about if you leave, you can get one of those rapid tests or something like that by August 1st. I wonder if there'll be something like that that we potentially would have available to us or the staff.
Right, because we can't require a test. And so if people don't want a test, then they have to quarantine for the 14 days.
Right.
But after you test positive, it's only 10 days, right? Because you've already, there's an assumption that the virus has already run its course.
Yeah.
But if a whole class goes out, that, would.
Yeah, that's a good question.
A good question.
The other question I have is on the buses. You're saying the windows have to be open. Does that mean in the winter time too? Raining, snowing?
Hailing, yep. Tornadoes, all the time. Literally. So on those days when it's 5 below, crank up those floor heaters and, you know, feet will be warm, but it will be cold on that bus. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
That is amazing.
So I just want to comment on that. It said there was a little clause on that about inclement weather as much as possible, but it's had something that said inclement weather on it.
Yeah. So I guess I would say it's Dave used the term, if I see whenever feasible one more time, you know, it's either guidance because it's safe or it's not. Because I'm not saying this snarky, but I mean, the virus is just as strong when it's raining and snowing as it is when it's sunny and beautiful outside. So that's my concern is, yes, I mean, I would be compelled to say, and it's the same thing Dave was saying, the whenever feasible, it becomes an impossible standard. So yes, we can, absolutely. We can shut them when it's snowing. And yes, I mean, there's some sense to say, yes, if it's snowing into the bus, we should shut the windows. But I would feel differently about putting my child on the bus then on a day when all the windows have to be up. And, you know, we are I thankfully have very, very reasonable length bus routes. And so, you know, it's not like students are sitting on the bus for an hour, you know, each way to school and home. So most runs are 20, 25, 30 minutes. But that's still a long time in my mind if we're not following what the doctors have said is the acceptable, safe way to do that. Yeah.
And for the buses, if we have to run multiple routes, is that going to be more on the budget?
Hang on a second. I was just writing myself a question. Yes. So the question will be, if we have to run full other routes, for example, in district special education, we have 6 students on a van. We need to have all those students, they all still need to be to whatever school they're going to by 8:10 a.m. And we're running 2 routes, 2 vans rather than 1. Yes, we pay double the cost. For all of the regular day runs, or same with special education, if we could figure out staggering So it's the same vehicle with the same driver redoing routes, we would pay just hourly rates. So anytime we're using the same vehicle and the same person, right? So if I have a vehicle and I'm a driver and I'm just going to run my route twice or 3 times, we're going to get billed my additional hourly rate for those extra, whatever it is, 2 hours to run the routes, you know, the second and third time. So and don't get me wrong, that adds up. It's certainly not as steep as, you know, the cost of a full bus when you're including the vehicle costs and maintenance and insurance and all that, but it still adds up very quickly. Yeah.
And I'm just going to give you my opinion on whether it should be 3 feet or 6 feet. I believe it should be 6 feet because in March, we eliminated our students from the equation. So we really don't know when all these kids go back together, what effect that it's going to have on the kids. I mean, I think if you listen to the news today with Florida and Texas, they say that kids are getting sick now.
Yep.
So my opinion for myself would be the 6 feet on the school buses as well. That's all my questions, Nerissa.
All right. I was waiting to see if you had something else, Linda. Paul Mayette, you were up next.
Before I get to my actual question, I just wanted to say, as I was reading through this, I really appreciated the extent to which you clearly had families in mind. When I saw like the consistent schedule for elementary, the clever login, I was so happy to see that. Speaking from the parent standpoint, the hotspots, I know that no matter what, there'll be pushback, but it was clear that there was thought about how to make, you know, the hybrid portion or the remote portion better for families. And I wanted to put that out there, that I appreciated that. I had one question about the line where it says the hybrid model is designed around the expectation that a full year's curriculum will be taught. Given the level of absenteeism that we've been discussing tonight, given the 2-week delay that we didn't know when that was written, all of that, do we still think it's feasible that we'll get through a typical full year's curriculum, or was that line simply meant to mean that they'll be consistently learning and introducing new material unlike last spring?
So I think with that particular question, a lot of people, when they went into the hybrid model, were talking originally about, we're going to come in and teach this lesson to this group A, and we're going to teach the same lesson to group B. So there would always be half of the curriculum taught in 1 week. And that really was not the spirit behind doing a hybrid model. So we wanted, I think, to make that point clear. The second idea about really teaching a full curriculum in 1 year, I mean, that's our goal, but the reality of that actually happening is unrealistic, but that doesn't mean we wanted to kind of just set that high mark, I guess, because we know that we are going to be delayed even in teaching the curriculum right out of the gate or the first day of school, because we do want to get kids settled in social and emotionally, make them feel comfortable in the new environment, as well as the teachers, and then begin to take a look at what were some of the gaps that we need to integrate into our curriculum for the year. Not to say we're going to go back and start teaching all of those particular items, but if we can find a strategic way to integrate them into the new material, we're going to be in a better position at the end of the year. So I think that was the 2 big ideas, or the takeaway is, one, it's not about getting through half of the curriculum. It's really about trying to set that bar high, but also knowing at the same time, realistically, we're going to run into some obstacles, and our kids are going to need a little bit more than just the academics this year for sure, as well as the teachers.
I think that's the key piece in the document. We keep talking about this, but attendance is taken, grading is done. I mean, that's very clear, regardless of the model we're in. The requirement was 180 days, and we just learned that it was reduced to 170 days. So those 170 days, we're taking attendance, we're grading. So I think it speaks to, like Kim was saying, this needs to be real education. If they're home, they need to be engaged for hours, not stay engaged for an hour and review what we did yesterday and move on. If it's counting for a day of learning, it needs to be engaging every day when they're home or in school. Yeah.
Thank you. One other question I had was just on the one-on-one initiative.
Yep.
Was there any, was the idea that everyone would do that, or if students already have access to a laptop, that they didn't need that? Would that, to make it easier in the district, was there any thought about polling families for see who might not need that?
Yep. So we actually, that question was in the survey. So it's in the vicinity of 50% now say that individual students have a dedicated laptop. So I think I defined it as, keyboard and monitor, not another device. But in all of our discussions over the years and I think I mentioned last week that technology working group has put together a beautiful report framed around the ISTE standards. And the discussion was it's all about having a uniform, consistent tool that if I'm a Mac guy and I love my Mac OS, but whatever the site is, getting into Clever, getting into Google, I don't know. But if some platform just doesn't play nice with the latest version of Mac OS, or someone has a Windows PC and they're still running XP or 7 or 10, versus it's a Chrome, it's a Chromebook, it's the same model. If something is going wonky, we can provide support and say, yep, it's that key on the top right. It unifies the playing field. And yeah, we assume, we could certainly do it cheaper if we allowed everyone to use the device. The approach that we've taken is it puts the same device in every student and teacher's hands. And that, again, I think the discussion with the technology committee is it takes one more challenge and complexity out of the picture, right? So education, as a teacher yourself, learning and teaching is a whole new world. So let's take one other piece and complexity out of the equation, and it just further, hopefully, simplifies things.
I thought that might be the case. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
All right, that's
absolutely.
all.
Thanks. I'll just add on to Brian, one more thought on that is that the ability to swap out, I know was key for a number of families in the spring where they had borrowed a device, something went wonky with that device, and they were literally able to swap right then and get back. And I'll credit Jim Montanari, who is on this call, who they literally said, like, I placed a phone call and somebody said, show up at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning at Salisbury Elementary. And Jim grabbed my, the old Chromebook was gone and the new one was in my hands and we were home and my kid was back online and learning by 9:30.
Absolutely.
So.
Yes, go figure. A principal becomes the Doler of Chromebooks. He became that guy.
Yeah.
And just to confirm, and he may be that guy to do it again this coming year, but we are waiting to hear definitively, but Chromebooks are very, very delayed. So it was PPE and now it's Chromebooks. So the initial thought was October. We're hoping it pulls back in a little from there, but we'll update you as soon as possible. But that we had an initial order that was already in that we expanded. So, but we do expect some delay in receiving all those.
All right, on to Caitlin. Who forgot what her question was. I saw that face. That was me. I had my hand up.
It was I had to think back because my question goes all the way back. And we went off and now it's not irrelevant, but just nowhere near topic at this point. And I'm sorry. I'm a mess. I'm sorry. I know Kim talks a lot about the social emotional needs and like health and welfare. So I know it's top priority, but when I was looking through the DESE document, title unknown, because I'm not flipping back, they didn't list it as a high needs priority. And so can it be added? Can we bring those students back every day as part of a high needs priority, even though they're not technically considered? Just because I think as you get older, mental health and being in the classroom 5 days could be just as important as being on an IEP or having, lack of internet for engagement. So I know Kim's always kind of thinking about that. I just wasn't sure if we were allowed to do it.
I think, and Brian, if I'm giving false information, let me know. But when they talk about the high needs, okay, so when they talk about high needs, it's more than just the being on an ed plan, right? So an ed plan doesn't guarantee you're going to be going every day, nor does not being on an ed plan mean that you can't go every day.
Right.
I think it's about looking at the bigger picture and looking at the students who really struggled in the spring with this, who maybe for various reasons had some home troubles where they were disengaged. So having gone through that experience and knowing where people are, or we hopefully know where people are, we can create that high needs list based on what these kids need as opposed to what they're attached to. Is it an IEP plan? Is it a, is it EL status? And there's certainly some that we're going to first and look at as a priority, but you don't have to have an IEP plan in order to qualify for that particular category. We want to get those kids in that we are most concerned about. And I have to say, all of the guidance counselors, for the ones that were in our radar, they have been in the radar, and we have those names. It's some of the other ones that over the course of the spring and the summer that we don't know about, that we're really going to rely on parents to give us some feedback, that we want to make sure we touch base with and give them the support that they need. And certainly they're not out of the mix as far as if they need it, we will bring them in.
Okay, I was just confused because Desi started with, they kind of went back and forth in that document where they said, high need, social, emotional, we need, and then they kind of at the end were like, but that doesn't count for, so I got nervous that they were just sort of pushing it away.
Right. And we all noticed that they gave you a whole criteria, and then the last line was, and then anybody else who you think needs it. And we're like, okay, well, that didn't really help us much. But again, I think just as a district, we are dedicated to making sure that those kids, high needs, whether they have a plan attached to them or not, are in our radar, and we are doing what we possibly can to get them in. And actually we have I want to say each school already has kind of an idea who those kids are because they struggled in the spring.
And I think we have to talk about the social and emotional health of all of our students, right? So everyone coming back, and dare I say, all of our educators and administrators and school committee members as well. So, this is about mental health, period. Not just about high needs, because I would put all of us in that category based on what we've done since March 16th. So I think there's those that absolutely we can quantify and qualify as high needs and say, yes, we need them in every day. But I think that ideally, number 3 in that remote learning, it's talking about including social emotional learning. And unfortunately, I think often SEL has become the buzzword. And it's really about, it's about mental health and acknowledging that when everyone returns remotely or in person, especially in person, whenever that happens, it's going to be a different environment because everyone is reacclimating to education again. So, and reacclimating to life again and being with friends and in the school setting. So it's, I think there's a bigger issue and need that we're addressing, but then certainly with the high needs, we can classify them that way. And it will just be, to what both Kim and Dave said, this comes down to, if we're saying we're in a hybrid model because we need smaller cohorts, and are bringing kids in every other day, every student we classify as high needs, we're shrinking, we're increasing those cohorts again. So we're kind of counterproductive to the whole concept of the reason why we're saying hybrid to begin with. So that's not a deterrent, that's just a factor that we have to keep in mind.
Oops. You good, Caitlin? Was that it? All right. Maureen.
My question kind of goes back to more to what Linda was talking about when we were discussing transportation in terms of the hybrid model. You used to talk about potentially having to run multiple bus routes to pick up the kids. So I'm concerned about how that would affect the beginning of the school day and the end of the school day. If you're busing in half of your students, dropping them off, cleaning the bus, going out to pick up the second half, what happens to those students when they're in the school? Who's watching them, especially at the elementary level? I mean, I think that this would have a bigger impact on the lower grades, because I think at the high school level, a lot of the kids are driving themselves or getting dropped off. But anyway, so I'm just wondering if you've thought about how those concerns would be addressed.
So the challenge is, if with the hybrid model, using DESI's guidance, which is 24 students per bus, and on average, our bus ridership is 50 or less, cohorting AB hybrid model pretty much resolves the issue. So as I stated here, if we use DESI's guidelines of 1 student per seat, we don't have an issue. The issue becomes if we go with the 6 feet, which I don't think is a bad thing, but that creates an issue where we then have to cohort. So or stagger times. So we would have to potentially, either decrease the academic day or increase the work day, right? So increasing the work day is negotiations, decreasing the academic day is a separate proposal that we'd have to make to DESI. So if we had whatever, so if, in a typical classroom, if we have 12 students or 10 students for Monday because they're cohort A, but on the bus run, 7 of them come in at the 8:10 rush, and then the other 3 or 4 come in at 8:55, those 7 that came in early are going to need to leave early. And so there's going to be significant disruption at the beginning and end of the day. So I think I'm concerned about the bus with the guidance, but I think that potentially the impact of what it would need to be for staggered start and stop times and start and end times of the day could potentially be far more impactful in regards to loss of time on learning. It's a tough cost benefit analysis there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, other questions on the hybrid model? All right, seeing none. If we can move on to the remote, and I'm gonna say this is the remote model, not the remote option that families individually can go for, but if the district was fully remote. So this is, I don't have page numbers, but it's option 3 under section 2 in the DESI form. Any questions? All right, I see none. And I'm just gonna say, my questions, I think, on this, I'll also go back to that remote, the optional remote that we talked about at the beginning of the meeting, or the beginning of the section, because I think a lot of those questions about, how does this work with an optional remote potentially happening at the same time, because I think that's a strong potential that could happen at some point if cases rise. The whole district goes remote, right? But we already have a contingent of students that's remote. I know that we're working strongly toward this. A remote model. We've talked about this quite a bit in past meetings, but I want to know how kind of that all works together. And I know we don't have those answers yet, so just want to kind of mark that one as a placeholder.
An important placeholder.
Moving on to the next section, which was high need students. I know we covered this a little bit, but I wanted to come back to this in case there are questions, additional questions. Anybody? All right, seeing none. Well, that's actually the end of the document. All right. So I think I want to come back to section 2 in a second, but can we talk about busing real quick first? I know I've heard a couple of opinions on the 3-foot versus 6-foot on the buses. Is there anyone else that wanted to weigh in with an opinion on 3-foot versus 6-foot on the buses? Anybody? All right, I see none.
Maureen was raising her hand.
Oh, Maureen is raising her hand. Sorry. Go ahead, Maureen.
I was trying to find my raise hand button. No, I just was going to say that I'm standing firm on the 6 feet. That's what we decided. I don't see why we would change that for buses. When kids are, enclosed in a bus, it should still be the same for what we've decided for the school. So I just wanted to say that.
All right. Anybody else that wants to speak out on this one? All right. I personally do see some differences, but I don't think enough to change. Obviously, as to the point, the conversation with Linda and Aaron about inclement weather and, exceptions, I think given where we live, there would probably be enough exceptions where windows would be put up that students would be in an enclosed space. And while there might be terrific ventilation in some nice warm days, I think that would change quickly as we went into the fall, and I would be very uncomfortable with a bus with all closed windows with students at 3 feet, because I think that's just too close. So having said that, can I get a motion from the committee on a 3 foot or a 6 foot, depending on which way you feel, and we'll work it from there.
I was going to say,
yeah.
I was going to say, you don't need to, if you want to take a vote, certainly, but you set the 6 foot standard. So all we're doing is implementing the same 6 foot standard on the buses. So if you want to do a separate vote, no issue whatsoever. That's not a problem.
I agree. I mean, this is a recommendation or guidance, I guess we can call it, but I don't want you to be in a situation where you don't have a vote and you're having a discussion, Brian. And that's my big concern, is I want you to be able to say, it wasn't a school committee discussion, it was a school committee vote, and it was, strongly in favor of X or unanimously in favor of X, because I think that's, as the body that's going to have to make the decision whether to put through the final plan or not, I think as we're having these discussions where changes may need to be made, or we're asking people to consider things that may not be considered now, you need to have something that you can firmly stand on.
I appreciate that.
That's my take on that. We're giving you a backbone, so to speak. Not that you don't have one on your own, but just
additional backbone,
nice,
maybe?
solid, like I've got a committee that's standing there and this is what they've said. You have plenty of backbone on your own.
All right.
So Linda, did you want to make a motion?
I will make a motion that we keep it at 6 feet.
Okay, for transportation purposes, or for busing purposes, I guess I should say.
I second.
All right, Paul's a second. All right, any further discussion? I need go ahead, Paul.
Well, I just have a concern. We went from a feasibility study that has put in-place learning out of the picture. And my concern, and I'm not saying that I'm adverse to the 6 foot busing vote, but I want everyone to bear in mind that if Brian comes back and Kyle and they've crunched the numbers and they say, well, we can't bus based on 3 foot, therefore we can't do a hybrid, so you get a virtual. I just want everybody to think that through, that's all. That's my only concern.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I can say for myself, I think safety has to come first, right? And we deal with other repercussions after that, but our goal always has to be the safety of students and staff ahead of anything else. We need to mitigate risk as much as possible, and certainly there's going to be some risk that's that's just inherent in the process that we're probably going to have to take on at some point, right? That's going to just be part of it. You have students that aren't fully remote, there's going to be some risk there. But I think where we can bide on the side of science and go by the overall safety guidelines, this is just my personal opinion, but I think we need to do that. And 6 feet is part of that for me.
Just have one more comment.
Yeah.
I'm good with the 6 feet. I'm going to vote it, but I just hope that as we go down this path, that it doesn't change when we get to the arts and the drama and the sports. That's all I'm concerned about. We've said 6 feet, so let's keep it across the board down the road. We're not getting any guidance from DESE on this, or how to deal with sports. I guess Maya is dealing with this now, right, Brian? Is that what
yeah, so sports, I would say the arts, we have it on all of that, but we do not have anything on athletics yet, no. Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
We
And
do have.
I was gonna say, I do appreciate the motion, not a formal motion, but the idea of consistency. I fully agree with you on that.
Yeah. All right. I need a roll call vote then, please. Erin,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Paul Lees,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayette.
Yes.
Thank you. Tina?
Yes.
All right, and I'm a yes as well. All right, thank you.
I was gonna say, so we'll attempt to have some information for you by Wednesday night, but Kyle will be my conscience. We'll reach out to NRT and map out exactly what 6 feet looks like and what that means for numbers. And obviously we won't have, to your concern, Paul, we won't know the answer of what that vote does. We'll be able to give you the number of kids we can fit on a bus. I'm going to tell you it's going to be about roughly a dozen. But as far as the impact, if we only have, 20% of students riding the bus, 25% of students riding the bus, then that certainly doesn't create an issue, the issue that you raised. But, one of the points I just want to make sure is clear. So our cohorting is going to be primarily, the primary focus is the classroom, right? We've got to make sure that the classes where they're spending the majority of the day is where we're breaking as best as possible. Again, high school is a very different beast. As best as possible, creating those cohorts. The transportation is going to be the after effect. So we're then going to say, okay, we need these students on schedule A, these students on schedule B. So I think as a base assumption, parents need to understand the bus routes that everyone has grown to know and love will likely be entirely different, because we might have to have buses doing a completely different section. And it, again, if it's 10 to 12 students they're picking up, it's going to be different stops and just a very different beast, because we're going to have to create the routes around the cohorts rather than just basic addresses alone. So just so that people are aware that regardless, that the vote you just took did not change any of that. It's just that the transportation has to be the afterthought. So, but we'll do some work on that hopefully and get some definitive numbers about what that means by Wednesday evening. And Kyle will keep me honest.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to come back to question 2, which is the which model are you leaning toward question, because I have heard a lot of things from a lot of different committee members, and I mean, Brian had that that polling question, I guess. I don't even know what to call that. Exit interview question. I think the very first time that we really met after the June guidance came out, and we talked about, which model are you leaning towards? And we really haven't had that conversation on an individual basis. So, Brian's got hybrid in here as kind of the default right now. But obviously, whatever the final plan is, it has to have a majority committee vote. So 5 people on the committee have to be willing to support that plan. I don't want to send, I don't know how everybody is individually feeling, and I don't want to send Brian and Kim and Kyle putting together this, and David putting together this document and have that not be the case, because I think this would look entirely different if there was another model that had support and hybrid did not. So I'm just going to leave it right there for right now and see if anybody has anything they want to say, because I believe there are strong feelings about this based on what we've heard in the past. I don't know if they've changed. I think it's fair to have a little discussion before. I don't even know if we need a vote, but I'd like to hear from individual committee members on where their support is now, because again, I don't want to send this in the wrong direction and then have a surprise come around on Wednesday when we go to vote this and people say, no, I can't support model X, whatever model X happens to be.
So if I can just clarify, the reason it says hybrid is because it defaults us there unless we find a lot of money to change the gymnasiums and cafeterias and auditoriums into classrooms. So that's the reason it defaulted. That you've never seen that on paper. I think we mentioned that last week, that just based on the feasibility test that's, you know, very simply summarized in this document, that's what it allows us to do.
And just to clarify on that, Brian, because I know you and I have kind of had this conversation, the 20 or 25% that we were looking at that would opt for remote learning, even if that was evenly distributed, would not be significant enough to change it so that the remaining students could be in the classrooms every day.
So in some places, yes, right? Even now,
but
like there are a select few places where we could do every day with the 6 feet. But it's you know, one room here, one room there. So 25% gets us closer and makes more places able to do the 6 feet in an every day. It would totally depend, and this is where the data has not been teased out yet. We asked questions about grade level in school so that we can tease out if it's 25% of the population and they're all at the elementary level, or all at the high school level, that changes things drastically, because 40% of the district, you know, enrollment for the high school is actually a much larger percentage of the high school. So we have to tease out the data more, but absolutely, it's dependent. It's possible, but I think it would have to be a far more significant number than 20 to 25% to get us comfortable. And again, we can do the 3 feet. So again, if we land somewhere in between, are we doing 4 or 5 feet? It comes down to the 6 foot distance cuts the number of students in half in the building. And it's as much about when they're sitting and spending, especially at the elementary level, when a cohort, a classroom is sitting, a homeroom is sitting all day long for 6 hours in the same place together. There's that piece, but it's also the movement of students throughout the building. Having half of a building in each day, we have far more confidence in maintaining safety with, you know, call it 240 students rather than 480 at Pine Grove. So it's not just the seats in the classroom per se, but there is the potential that if that number, and there was a statistic quoted today that every week that goes by, that number grows by 5 to 10%, the percentage of parents who would opt for fully remote. If that pattern holds true for the next 6 weeks until we start, we're pretty much deciding that we're going fully remote at that point. So it's possible.
So Nerissa?
Yes, Paul.
I just want to chime in for a minute. I know you want to get the viewpoint of the different committee members. My only concern, I mean, we can certainly do that. My only concern is that we have these meetings set up, these, I think, 5 virtual meetings where we're going to hear from stakeholders, meaning parents, and it may be a Q&A, but it may also be, I want this or I want that, is one concern I have, and I'm suggesting this might be premature. The other thing I'm concerned about is we met with the TRTA today for the first day, and we are really at very formative stages of discussion. So it's okay, I guess, to come out and do this, but I think it's premature. And I understand you don't want the administration to have to jump into one plan or another, and we're all trying to give them guidance, but I just question why we would, have these virtual meetings if, we've already made up our mind.
So I don't think we've made up our mind, but we have to say what model we're leaning toward, right? And I almost consider that, I believe the parent discussions and to some degree the survey, although, the intent is to look at that on Wednesday as well, is going to be to some degree independent of the leaning toward, right? We need to lean toward one right now, and that can change before we get to the final. But I don't want us to come to Wednesday and have the administrators from putting together a document that we can't support. Does that help? I'm not looking at August 10th, I guess, is the deadline, which is what I see all this building toward August 10th, right? We're continuing to collect feedback and all that stuff, but we need to have a leaning toward essentially for Wednesday, unless you want to schedule another meeting later in the week, because that initial plan is due July 31st.
And just to throw out there, this is a completely non-binding my understanding is many districts are not voting on this. School committees are not voting on this because it's literally the commissioner wants to get a sense of where people are heading. So you could also take the approach of, let me put it in writing because it doesn't mean anything. And it's just at this point in time, this is where I see us heading. If I had to, say, what could we make happen today for an organization? This is where we're leaning. But if it makes more sense for you to not take a formal vote because it feels like it binds you and you've made a formal opinion rather than kind of what people are feeling like, that allows you to get through all of the meetings, all 6 of them, right through Friday, and then let that feedback, what's the word, enhance or guide, thank you, our discussions in the coming weeks, over next week and then to the following week when that plan is finally voted. I guess that's just next week.
It all blends together after a while.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it's the will of the committee, we can do that too. I've talked to a number of districts that are voting it. I know MASC has said that we do not have to, that the final plan is the one that must be voted. The initial plan, there's no requirement that you vote it. So I guess I can leave it up to the committee on that one too. If we'd rather not vote an initial plan, we don't have to. We can say, essentially, that the feasibility study and DESE's goal of having, every student that you can safely have back in a classroom, brings us to hybrid, and just leave it there for now if we want to do that. But I think that also puts us in a tough bind time-wise, which is the thing that I feel like we're constantly fighting, is that there's not enough time to do this all. And I don't want to give anyone a false impression.
So with or without a vote, so if you didn't take a vote, and there's some feedback, some tweaks I want to make on this document, I'm literally cutting, pasting, and it's supposed to be 400 words or less per. It's not 400 words per question, but that's again, it doesn't have to be. This doesn't have to necessarily be reflective of specific action you've taken. It can be me summarizing what I'm understanding, and you then continue the discussion this week into next week, and then you take a vote on the plan. And it can be entirely different, right? We could be saying we're leaning towards bringing everyone back and by next week be fully remote. And there is literally, this is not being recorded as a submission with the state. This is data for him to dipstick. And I will be interested to see when everyone submits this, if anything changes after the majority of the state says we're going hybrid, or people, a larger number are going remote, or no one's going full in. So
let me ask first, input on whether we actually want to take a vote, or do we just want to let it default to under our current set of restrictions that we've adopted, the DESE goal, it defaults to hybrid? Vote, no vote.
Why would it default to hybrid and not say the 2 options we have to select are hybrid and remote? That given the feasibility study that we don't have the option to vote the full back.
We have to choose one to lean toward. That's question 2 in the document. Find it.
Yes, by the 10th.
Which reopening model within your plan are you leaning towards for the start of the school year? Please select the predominant model for elementary, middle, and high school. For example, in a plan where the majority of students are coming back in person full-time, a subset of students may continue to learn remotely if needed. Districts can use the text box below this chart to provide further explanations of their selections if needed. That's from the form.
I'm just a little confused because I thought it was just kind of a dipstick of where we were at. If we submit this, that it's not locking us into the hybrid, though, right?
No.
Yeah,
it's not. So is that your vote to say, let's just let it sit where the feasibility study and the goal leave us and not put a school committee impression on this, or? Where does that leave you, Maureen?
I mean, I kind of feel like we should give a sort of snapshot of where we're at right now. I understand Paul's point about we have these sessions coming up this week and we don't want to give the impression that we've already made up our minds, and we certainly haven't already. I mean, I haven't made up my mind, but I kind of know where I'm at the moment. And if that's our job, if that's what we're supposed to be doing, I don't have a problem with sharing my thoughts.
Okay. Linda?
I don't
We
think
lost your
any-
audio. There you go.
Because in a month from now, we might be all just going remote depending on what's happening in the world. So I think just to say our opinion, going hybrid is probably what we're leaning towards. But I mean, so long as we don't have to lock into that until we get better guidance on some other things and what the actual plan that the district is going to have, I don't see a problem with, so I would be hybrid as well.
Okay. Tina?
Can I just clarify something? I wasn't
Yes.
saying I was hybrid. That's not
Yeah,
what
no, I get that. You're answering two different questions, I think, which is fine.
Yeah.
That was my pause there as well, was just to kind of sort that out in my head what I was hearing. All right, Tina?
Yeah, I think if you're going to give us a place to unpack our thoughts in front of everybody, I do think it's helpful, especially for the administration. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. And when we initially went around in the beginning, I went from being all excited about making hybrid work to then changing to remote. And again, from a working parent perspective who has young children, who this has, changed everything drastically for everyone, even for planning purposes, it would be easier for me to plan just making the decision that I'm going to choose they would be remote versus going to a hybrid model and them going to school 2-3 days a week and then having to find alternative childcare and then having to take into account that my children are now with other children and other people who they haven't been exposed to all this time, taking away control of who I can choose to expose them to, who can help me. So for that reason, I would choose remote all the way, as much as it would pain me. And my concern earlier when we were talking about the remote option for this from the state versus the remote option from the school is I would, of course, I'm going to use Brian's word, unequivocally want to opt into whatever virtual remote option the school would put together to make sure that we were still a part of the Triton community as a whole, which is why I'd like to see more planning around that. I mean, I know it sucks and there's going to be a lot of people that are upset and that don't agree, but like I think we said before, if the majority of the committee agrees along with the administration that's the way to go, that is something I would support. It's just focusing on a remote option and the hybrid being the secondary option. People that are working 9-to-5s in large companies, they're not going back in September either. So why would we send our kids back? And that's where I stand.
I think that's the most I've heard you talk too in, well done, Tina.
Yeah, there's more where that came from, but I'll stop.
Be careful what you ask for.
Right.
All right, thank you. Paul Goldner.
Knowing what makes good pedagogy, I have a very hard time believing that the in-person learning this year can surpass remote learning in educational value. Because good pedagogy is founded on small group interactions that are going to require technology to facilitate in the classroom anyway. So if we're utilizing the technology to make the pedagogy happen, then we're not really in a different scenario, remote versus in person. And so then the safety concerns outweigh any sort of pedagogical benefits. In addition, I don't know that the social emotional benefit that the state says will be there will emerge. We talked about it a few weeks ago, and I see an equal amount of trauma, if not greater, going into the classroom under the conditions that this will require to execute, that at best, that mental health aspect is a wash. And I think logistically, it's easier to pivot from remote to hybrid if everybody gets smart and wears masks for 6 weeks than it is to pivot from hybrid to a remote model. So at this point, I'm leaning towards the remote model.
All right. Thank you. Paul Mayette.
I think that, much of what I was going to say was just said by Paul. I think the arguments for in-school learning, as I have understood it through the conversations I've had here and elsewhere, rests on 3 pillars. One is that the idea that education would be better, that it would be better for the mental health of the students, and then it would be easier for people to, get childcare. I think that DESE's guidance has the potential to disrupt all 3 of those as far as benefits, and Paul just made those points. That said, I think that for the time being, if hybrid is a possibility, continuing to pursue that, it's like I want to, I guess, chase that down to the last second, as much as possible. I really, really am looking forward to Wednesday night's discussion. I think that could be a make or break one for me in terms of which way I would lean. If you can give me data on how much this is spreading in school and give me a sense of how well we'll be able to trace contacts and how quickly we'll be able to isolate cases, that would really sway me one way or the other. But I'm on that fence right now.
So you're talking about the conversation with the health agent and the public health nurse?
Yes, I think that's a pivotal conversation. I think that's absolutely vital to this discussion.
I'm sorry, I don't know, Brian, is it just the health agent or is the public health nurse as well? I think I said that. You're muted.
Was trying to look at my email to see if I had an update. Deb, the health agent, had confirmed and was working with the public health nurse to join her. So I have not got confirmation that the nurse is coming yet. Okay.
Well, hopefully she will. And either way, I think that Deb Rogers can provide us a good framework around what Paul's talking about, because contact tracing and that type of thing is my understanding. They've got all the background on that. So
absolutely.
Okay. Who hasn't spoken that wants a chance to? Paulise?
I was just raising questions before. I wasn't stating my position. And so understanding that I'm an advocate of the people who have elected me, and I do want to hear from them. My own personal opinion, based on all the research that we've done and all the materials that we've looked at, is I'm leaning towards a virtual model, only with the requirement that the administration get it right, and that rather than splitting their efforts right now into 2 different camps, being the hybrid and the virtual, which we're going to end up with an inferior product on both sides, in my opinion. I'd rather have them lean towards a remote, but with the idea that timelines are put in place for addressing a hybrid. And as we get more time under our belts, it's important to recognize that there's a possibility of a vaccine that may come about, and it may change the landscape. One thing I'm very fearful of is going into a hybrid and then people in school getting sick, and educators, because I can almost guarantee you that if that happens, this whole thing is going to go sideways in the worst way possible, and education is going to fall into a deep, dark black hole. And by going virtual, we avoid that for the short term. And I think it's a safer course.
All right, thank you, Paul. Anybody else who hasn't spoken, who wants to speak? Last chance. I mean, obviously you can speak up. But. All right, so I'm actually very interested to see survey results and the discussion groups. My current feeling, so I guess I at this point would like to have the best of all worlds. I see the cases in our local communities right now being very low. I went back and pulled numbers going back to early June, and our towns numbers are extremely low. The towns around our towns are still very low right now. The outlier on that was Rowley through like mid to late June. But when I went back and pulled those numbers, even though they had gone up, like, I want to say it was 22 cases in that period of time, which is significant for the size population we have. There's a nursing home in town that had registered 11 to 30 cases in that time. So it's entirely possible that we'll definitely at least 11 of those cases, right, were in that particular nursing home. And it's a strong possibility, I would say, that, you know, that there were more than just those 11 cases there. Newbury has increased 1 since the beginning of June. Salisbury has increased 23, which again, for their population is not significant. That's when you're looking at case rates, which is what the way they tend to measure that is, you know, cases per 100,000 people. So if you were going to try and scale every single town to look at what it would look like if you measured them against each other, that's only about a 20 person difference in the case rate. So it's relatively small. My inclination, because I have 2 big fears. One, that we're going to go 1-to-1, and that if we're in full remote at the time we go 1-to-1, if you cannot get the students to understand how to use the devices that they may not have used before, though they may have used similar ones, that your remote is at a full stop for that student. That they, if they don't have support at home and we don't have the opportunity to be live somehow, teaching them what that looks like, that they're at a full stop. And my other big fear is that they don't have the opportunity to make a connection in person, because, and I don't know, you know, I defer to the Pauls minus Paul Lees on this one, I guess, but based on my own kids, they will tell you that being 10 feet apart from their friends allows for a better connection than being on, you know, Kids Messenger on an iPad. It's just that in-person, whatever. I don't know if you're picking up body language or whatever it is, but for them, it seems to make a far better connection than anything all virtual does. My preference at this point, if I, you know, ideal world, I think would be to say, let's get back in hybrid if we can, but let's set a date to look at, you know, where cases in our community are, and even if they're not at the whatever the crash period is, if we set, right, that one thing where Desi says this is when you close your schools, if we had a date set to review and say, does this look like it's trending in the wrong direction? If so, let's go remote at this point and have the opportunity to let parents plan, right, rather than saying we've got to close schools tomorrow, off you go. That's where it's at. I would love to get that kind of hybrid ability to, or dual capability, I guess, to have planning practice or planning ability for families, and also have the opportunity to get kids in classrooms, the ones that want to be there at least initially, the best that we can. Because I feel like to some degree, those kids that are going the all remote option, they have some support at home. Right? Those are your kids where the family is already fairly certain that they can make do for their students without having them in a physical classroom. And some of those students, not all of them, where the families want them in a hybrid model, is because they don't feel like they have that ability at home to support the students, to get them to that stage where they're at least partially self-sufficient. So I don't know, that's the best of all worlds, right? It's not a good answer, I guess, but that's where I'm sitting at right now. Tina?
Well, and I'm just wondering, to your point that you just mentioned, Nerissa, that for those that can say that they can commit to a remote model now, it's because they have support. But the sooner that we can see how many people are committed to that versus the people that need support, and from a planning perspective, then it would make more sense to look at the hybrid model and how we could bring in those people that need those supports, knowing that now we can not put aside, but just, know how many children that we could possibly support in person if we had to shift to that. And then as a district and as a community, really rally around offering support to those families versus just kind of not guessing. But that was my thing. If I can support my kids and keep them home, and I'm not saying it's not equitable, but in my mind it's fair because I can offer that support to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between what's equitable and what's fair. And I think we all know that there are inequities in the system as a whole, the way it's set up, but there is a difference between what's fair and what's equitable. And I think that's what's fair. So
fair. And I will say that goes back to that whole idea of the catch-22, right? Is that I think until families know what we can offer for a remote, they're not going to be able to give us a decision on what they're willing to buy into, right? They're not going to make a definitive decision on that. So that's, I think, going to be one of our ongoing struggles. All right. Caitlin had been up first, but she forgot again. Oh, wait, she's back. I'll let you go. No, she's not. Paul Goldner, are you?
So I think I fully agree with what you said about your children, Nerissa, making those connections better in person. Then I fully agree. And the idea of trying, and my job in Newburyport, trying to teach students this year that maybe I've never seen face-to-face, or I've seen face-to-face twice before a crash or something, like, depending on what happens this year, is scary from that educational perspective. How do I do this if my students don't buy into me as someone that they should trust? But by the same token, I don't know how to do it in a classroom under the guidance either. And I think the remote options, that remote model there allows for some contacts. And I think if you build in the social, emotional, and getting to know your teacher aspect to whatever model you're starting the year in, as like, this is the key, get to know the people in your room, get to know the teacher in front of you, whether that's in a remote model primarily and kids are seeing their teachers in small groups for an hour once a week, or whether it's in the hybrid and you're in the classroom for half the time of a week. If you build in those things, then the year is going to work better regardless of where you're at. And the other thing is this whole discussion, when you talk about the community resources, is infuriating me, because if Desi had said in June, we have a big problem, we need the schools to engage the community now in figuring out how to get children in places where they can do learning, the whole scenario is different and it goes better in so many different ways. But they didn't. They threw up their hands.
I feel that. Thank you, Paul. Caitlin? Was this an intentional hand?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not allowed to use that side of the screen. I've been quiet because I think I have felt and thought almost every single thing everyone has said, whether it contradicted my initial thoughts or moved on. I think meeting with the health agent, I was excited for a remote option for my own personal family needs until I found out it was state controlled. And then I got a little nervous and I wanted to go through, I want hybrid to work so well for so many other families and their needs, that I think Wednesday's conversation with the health agents and kind of getting those health pieces squared away will be where will help me lean in a better direction. But I agree 100% with Paul Goldner and what he just said, that making a connection with students and having students make connections can happen online, and they can buy in that. So where I lean now would be remote, but I want to love hybrid. And I want that, I just do. And I'm not quite there yet.
That is fair as well. So I don't know if anyone else has anything else to say, but I just want to go back to this idea of a vote real quick. And my inclination at this point, because I'm hearing a lot of people between models wanting information on Wednesday, definitely the whole committee not being on the same page, would be to not vote an initial plan, to leave it at hybrid for right now, continue to be able to have these ongoing, open, honest conversations, and have that opportunity to listen to the health agent and possibly the public health nurse on Wednesday, have the opportunity as other districts file initial plans, and we're hearing pros, cons, and different opportunities that we may not have heard of yet, to take advantage of that opportunity going toward August 10th and not actually have a vote. Just say, you know, given the state's goal and the feasibility study, we're currently at hybrid. That's where we sit, and knowing that it may change one way or another, and doesn't have to be something that's done on Wednesday, or that Brian and Kim are going to be in. Oh, sorry, it's just Brian since Kim's on vacation. In an absolute panic over on Wednesday night because we've done a 180 and he needs to rewrite something completely different for Friday. I don't want to put them in that situation, him in that situation. So I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but that's kind of where I'm sitting right now on putting an initial plan to a vote on Wednesday. I would say, let's just not do it. Let's know where we're at. Let's continue to have these conversations, right? So that as we get closer to the August 10th, you know, we're have a solid idea of where the committee is at a whole.
And just to note, so we're gonna, and again, this is a text document, but I'm gonna have to like probably select a radio button, right? So for each of the 3 grade levels and where we would be, but we have that narrative piece. So and I'll redraft this for Wednesday for you to see again, put in a piece there that, you know, I just selected the hybrid model up above, but we're still split 50-50, and you know, the committee's vacillating between a full remote model and hybrid. And so I can explain that. Again, this, some people have questioned, what is this literally, where this exercise tonight is literally for the commissioner to dipstick. And will things change again before the 10th? I don't know, and I've said this in past weeks, our most important process is planning, is the 9 of you making decisions about what we're gonna do as a district. Am I worried about being compliant with DESE? Of course I am, because I have to be. But by the same token, we all need to focus on making the decision about what works best for our students and our teachers and our community. So yeah. There's part of me that wants to say, no, don't take a vote on this. Don't give them that I don't know what the word I'm looking for there, that pleasure or happiness. Satisfaction. Thank you. Wow, I cannot do words tonight. Thank you. Satisfaction was the word I was
got them all.
Yeah, apparently. So I can add.
I was gonna say, does anybody have an objection to not taking a vote on the initial plan on Wednesday at this particular piece of it? All right, I'm seeing none. So that's gonna be our plan for now. So is there anything else you need on this form, Brian, before we move on?
No, thank you.
No, okay. So one of my questions is going to be, I want to make sure that, so the intention right now, we have roughly 1,300 responses. I know Ketty went ahead and pushed out the survey again on social media tonight. Potentially that'll ramp up another set of responses coming in. Our intent right now is to bring that data to the committee on Wednesday. But we need to know, rather than Brian doing 81 different reports in different directions, I need to know what the committee wants to see, how that data needs to be sliced and diced, so that what you want to see is what's prepared for that meeting. So what do you want to see from those survey results? And I'll give you an example. So one of the things I've said is I really want to see that breakdown of, I mean, it doesn't break down to the 3 models, but it's essentially the questions around those 3 models. I want to see those broken down by school, and I want to see them broken down by grade, because I want to see where that spread is, you know, and also the optional remote. Where are those optional remote students coming from? Are they all in elementary school? If so, are they coming from one particular elementary school? Are they spread throughout the grades? I think that's an important data point. So I want to gather those data points so that we know what you need to see come Wednesday, because it's really hard to be able to do that on the spot. Anybody? I mean, I can take my best guess, but if there's something you want to see, then we need to know that now. Paul?
I would throw out, and I don't know if this is even an option, but if there's a way for us to look at the raw data ahead of time, sometimes I am better able to sort through it when I'm able to just make some of that slicing and dicing myself beforehand. But I don't know if that's something we're able to do.
So I think Brian has cumulative like bar graphs and percentages by question, but by default, that's what SurveyMonkey puts out.
I can filter it by each question, so I could run basically run that same snapshot of all the questions for Newbury Elementary, for Salisbury, for Pine Grove, for the middle school, for the high school. I could do it by grade level, run it 12 times and give you 12 reports. So I basically can have it spit out anything, or to your point, Mr. Mayed, if you're interested in digging deep, there's 1,406 responses as of this moment in time, and I can export a CSV file, or it'll, I forget what that other big analytics program is. So it'll dump it into whatever format you want. And we could do some, if you want to do some playing with the data, and that way.
So my question is, Brian, because I know we've struggled with this in surveys in the past, student surveys, are we positive that this is clean of student data? That there's no way to identify a student for FERPA?
There's no way to identify a student, no.
No way, okay.
No. So, and I even had to have it so, part of the thing, and I know there was some questions about this, is the reliability of this data. So if someone were to look at this from the reliability of a data set, this was anonymous. I had to allow individuals to fill it out multiple times, so that if I have 3 students, I could fill it out 3 times for each of my 3 kiddos. So shy of us going deep into the data and exporting that and looking for IP addresses and saying, oop, there are 30 responses from this IP address. We're going to assume this is representative data, but this would certainly, this would not be something we would make massive global decisions on. This is kind of guiding our discussions. But certainly, absolutely, I can export the data in a way that would not be, it would be FERPA compliant. Yes.
Okay. So as far as formal reports to bring to a school committee meeting now, because I'm anticipating, I don't know what your thoughts on this, Brian, but I was anticipating like a screen grab so that you can see it as a bar graph.
It actually printed off as a PDF, so I can, yep. So I could do, a total summary of all the questions, right, and put one on each page just so it doesn't, get messed up, and it would give you the question, a bar graph or pie chart, and the table with the questions and the numbers and the percentages for each of the responses. And then I could do the same thing by school, and I could do the same thing by grade level. That's going to be a big pile of PDFs. So I guess that's the question, is what would you most want to see? Just the summary data, and then also maybe by school, which would start to give you some sense of, is this a high school, right? I mean, if all of the responses and saying I would choose remote, the majority are at the high school, that would certainly start to, that would start to tease that question out.
Ryan, I would just add, if you can do it by grade, what Nerissa suggested, that would be helpful. Especially like at the elementary level, because a kindergartner could look, response could look very different from a sixth grader.
Yep. Yep. So by grade across the district, not by school.
Yeah, I think across the district.
For all questions, Maureen, or are there ones in particular that you?
I think I would say for all.
Okay.
I think that'd be the easiest, is just to, yeah. So you basically get 14 documents. You would get summary and then 13 grades, K through 12. Okay. It'd be the same full data set for each of those grades.
Brian, can you do it the other way? Because that might make more sense, is a set of all the grades in one graph for each question.
What?
so
Maybe I'm alone there, but I just had a Caitlin with that right side of the screen moment.
I thought what you just said was
for.
that we would see like grade 1 and then all of the questions. Is that what you were saying?
No, so I can go in and filter by any question. So I would go in and filter by, is it question 1, which is what grade is your child in? So then it would give me all the questions. Obviously, grade 1, that would be the big bar graph for that response. And then all the questions and all the summaries would be total for grade 1 across the district. Do that for grade 2, grade 3, do that by grade level. So you've got 13 grades, K and 1 through 12. And then a 14th would be the summary, which is all 1,406 responses. We are so not speaking the same language.
No, what I was thinking would be helpful is seeing, so let's say it's the transportation question, right?
Yep.
Is seeing grade, breaking those transportation yes under the 3-foot guidance down into grades, so we can see.
So no, I think you would have to export the raw data to manipulate that way, because you'd be looking for a specific question to give you a chart by grade level.
Okay.
Right, for every question on one, right? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes.
So for question on transportation, here's the response, and it's showing me for each of the 4 responses, it's showing me 13 responses with each of the grade level. Be like a stacked bar chart. I will play with that. My guess is that's probably like the Uber Pro Enterprise version of SurveyMonkey, which we don't have, but we'll play with that a bit. Yeah.
Okay. All right, because otherwise we're trying to compare across 13 graphs, and that's going to be really hard too.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else from the committee that you really, really want to see? I'll just add too, I think that a breakdown of IEPs, 504s, ELL, and Gen Ed, for lack of a better term, across the questions would also be helpful, because I think that's, I would want to see where families of a student on an IEP answered far differently than, students of families on 504s or that type of thing. So, all right, anything else on that? Okay, so that was all I had for tonight. On Wednesday, we've got, we'll have a final review of the initial plan. We'll have, we'll probably actually swap it. So since we'll have guests, we'll probably have health agent first, and you guys can fire questions at the health agent all you want. And then I would suggest probably after that, I know that people have been going through, because they all came all at once. People are still working their way through. They've told me the transportation, remote learning guidance, facilities and operations guidance, and classes with safety issues, for lack of a better term. So I would say if you have questions on those or things that you need the committee needs to address on those, that might be a good second thing to go through. You've got to handle just one final go through on this initial plan, whatever form it looks like and whatever changes have been made at that point without a vote. And then we'll have an executive session at the end of that for an update on the negotiations that personnel and negotiations are working on the Triton Teachers Association with. Is there anything I'm missing? Okay. So that's the plan for Wednesday. Is there anything else that I'm missing that anybody feels like needs to be addressed, something that we haven't gone through yet that needs to be gone through, not necessarily on Wednesday, but could be farther down the road? I just want to make sure that we're going through everything that to satisfy the committee's concerns. All right, seeing none, thank you all for your time tonight. I'll just go back through again. Sessions are tomorrow. Start tomorrow. Survey is still open, so if families haven't answered the survey yet, if they could please do that as soon as possible. The email for questions is reopening at tritonschools.org. The email for feedback is schoolcommittee@tritonschools.org, and we will meet again on Wednesday at 7. Thank you guys for your time tonight. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Maureen.
Second.
Second from Paul Goldner. All right. I need a roll call vote, please. Erin?
Yes.
Paul Goldner.
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Paulise?
Yes.
Linda?
Yes.
Paul Mayette?
Yes.
Tina?
Yes.
And I'm a yes as well. Thank you guys for coming tonight. Thank you to the principals for coming tonight. I know this was 3 hours that you probably could have spent on other things. And thank you to the administration as always. And Kim, enjoy your vacation. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks everyone.